So it really wasn't much of a presentation.
Oh, okay. Well, it is a request by DLNR to submit a petition, right?
Mm-hmm.
So
By the state legislature, yeah.
Yeah, the legislature is requesting DLNR submit a petition. So I guess we just have to pull that together. So you're just looking for people that might be interested in helping us put together that.
Yes.
petition.
Yes.
Okay.
It's in skeletal form right now.
Yeah, a lot of this is just FYI. So yeah, go ahead, Jim.
If I can just jump in, I remember, some time ago, I remember that Linda Chow gave us sort of an overview in terms of what our purview is within the ESRC. And although the primary focus is on HCPs and safe harbors, it does also pertain to other issues relating to biodiversity and or protection and of biodiversity throughout the state as a whole. So this definitely fits under what seems to be the umbrella for the ESRC to actually talk about and look at the biological part of it.
Okay.
Yeah, and I don't think it requires ESRC concurrence or anything, but it's certainly something having to do with endangered species, and so a good thing to bring up with the committee generally, and maybe we can get back and see if there's any other input once we start to put something together.
Yeah.
Okay. Would it be helpful to, so this is just FYI, you're not seeing if we are supportive or not supportive or?
No, it's not so much that. It's just reaching out to see if people are able to help, would like to help actually draft the document, provide information, etc. And to what capacity.
Well, Melissa does whale research, maybe.
Yes, she does.
I mean, I'm happy to provide the data that we have. I think we have the bulk of the research other than the work published out of Sheila Conant's lab on POYO research. And yeah, I can, as a starting point, I can send over the testimony that we submitted when this resolution was under consideration last spring. UH submitted testimony. So yeah, I know we're not currently weighing in on that, so I won't do that. But yeah, happy to provide whatever research we have. None of it has been published yet. It's in various forms of preparation. So, some student theses have been finished, some other things like that, and are in process of being submitted.
Yeah, my intention was to actually reach out to you specifically, Melissa. I haven't gotten around to doing that yet, though. Thanks.
This was a statewide petition, right? Not just Oahu.
Yes, right.
The original resolution that I don't remember if it's under I actually don't know who submitted it to the legislature this last year, but whatever was submitted, they had petitioned for it to match the state listing, which is Oahu only. And within the first hearing, it was brought to their attention that because it's not a distinct population segment, that under the ESA, it's actually not possible to list just the Oahu population in a way that would mirror the state law. And so the resolution was changed to include all of the Hawaiian Islands, which would be a more appropriate consideration under the ESA.
So I can't be a part of anything related to the drafting or information, but I'm happy to answer any questions related to the process, or if anyone has any questions that I may not know the answers, but I can help try and find the right person that might have the answers on process related to this.
Thanks, Melissa.
And then a question is there a similar effort at the state level to expand the scope of that to statewide?
I don't know that I can answer that question.
Yeah, go ahead, sorry. Is Afshin able to speak to that?
Good morning, everyone. Yeah, we don't have any plans to do that statewide that I'm aware of right now. So, but that's something, if the committee feels like that's the direction we should go, it would be great to know the input from the committee with regards to that.
Well, state law follows federal, right? So if it gets listed federal, we can list it state, right?
Mhm.
Don't think that the distinct population segment decision is like a locked in stone biological decision. So I think that you should, my only suggestion is not to necessarily immediately remove that option. It would be a tough road maybe, but it's not like a taxonomic determination that you see in the scientific literature. It's based upon what the current guidance is in the rules and regulations and how it's interpreted.
Okay.
Okay, well, we can reach out to you guys individually. It's more like a heads up that this is, there's a reso from this last session, and we'll be moving forward with that just because we're asked to do that. And we can work with the Fish and Wildlife Service to make sure that, whatever we submit is, follows proper procedures, and that, and then we'll just move from there. That'll kind of put Fish and Wildlife. So then once we do that petition, Michelle, then that kicks off your process.
Yes, there would be a review of the petition and it would go into the, there's a team that would then look at that information and determine whether or not listing is warranted.
Okay. All right. Any other questions or comments on that? Yeah, thanks, Paul.
Welcome. Thank you.
Koa, how you doing?
Yeah, I think I figured out the YouTube live, so we're good.
Okay.
So I can start the next agenda item.
All right, go for it.
Okay. Share my screen. Let's see. Okay, so this agenda item is rescinding the Umikoa Ranch Safe Harbor Agreements Incidental Take License. So you guys might recall in the January annual review meetings of this year, this was an agenda item, but the ESRC wasn't comfortable voting on terminating or recommending to the board to terminate the license because sufficient information wasn't provided to you guys prior. So in that submittal that I sent out, there's like a brief overview of the situation and the circumstances, and I'll also summarize that in the following slides. So, and then afterwards we can discuss and then eventually vote on it. So just background information. So the point of the Umikoa Safe Harbor Agreement was to benefit water birds, specifically the Hawaiian duck Maui and the Hawaiian goose the nene. The baseline numbers for the safe harbor were 2 Hawaiian ducks and 0 Hawaiian goose. And according to Fish and Wildlife, in 2020, no birds are present on the property. And the Umikoa Ranch Safe Harbor Agreement is on the Hamakua coast of Hawaii Island. So that red star on this map. So the current status of the ranch. So the Safe Harbor Agreement expires in December of this year. It was a 20-year agreement. The ITP was already rescinded back in 2020 by Fish and Wildlife. And therefore the ITL, the incidental take license, is no longer valid because the ITP has to be valid for it to be. Recently, Umikoa was sold to a new landowner, the Abju Corporation, in 2019. However, at the time of sale, the agent who closed the deal wasn't aware that there was a safe harbor agreement attached to the land. We've been in contact with that agent, and we've been trying to contact the new landowner who's based in Japan, but we have not received a response yet. But we'll following this meeting, we'll continue to try and reach out to this landowner to give them notice of the situation and our efforts to terminate the license. So currently, the requirements under the Safe Harbor Agreement are not being met to manage the habitat and the land to be ideal for the water birds. And we have not received an annual report since FY18, so it's been a while. So just to give you an idea of the place, it's a number of ponds on ranch land. Yeah, that's pretty much it. So yeah, are there any questions? And Afshin is here as well to help answer and fill in the information gaps.
Yeah, I've got a question. Thanks for the overview, Yuko. And besides the biological issues, which I know we've talked about before, I'm just very curious because this is sort of a real concern I've got that we should have relative to safe harbors is how did the disclosure of the safe harbor fall through the cracks when the property was transferred? And we need to make sure that I thought that was one of the real stipulations with the safe harbor is that it did transfer with property change. And just making sure that there's a proper process in place so that is really, people are really aware of that.
Well, I think that's the responsibility of the landowner and the agent, or you could say that it's part of due diligence. I don't know there's anything that says that, the state has to make sure that the agent discloses, and the lack of disclosure doesn't absolve you from your responsibility. So all that's related to the real estate transaction. I wouldn't want to have to inherit being responsible for making sure that the agent discloses everything that they're supposed to disclose. So to me, that comes down to the parties, and lack of disclosure doesn't absolve you of your responsibility. So anyway, I hear what you're saying, but I don't want to inherit that responsibility to monitor every real estate transaction having to do with a permit. So I would push back against that. I mean, we would probably reach out every time, and we've done it here, but then we're getting no response. So one of the things here that I should note is that I know Linda Chow from our Attorney General's office was a little uncomfortable that we hadn't actually contacted the new owner yet. We've tried to contact them through the agent, but we're saying, well, we're gonna. I think Koa told her, well, we're gonna cancel the permit, and then we'll try to get a hold of them and let them know. And she was a little uncomfortable with that. But the flip side is, the ITP has been rescinded, and so technically the ITL isn't even valid anymore because it's contingent upon the ITP being in place. We haven't been able to contact this new owner, and technically the permit isn't valid anyway. So, in terms of a process, perhaps it'd be nice if we contacted the private landowner prior, but I could see going ahead and at least making the recommendation, and then maybe before we take it to the board, we'll redouble our efforts to contact the new landowner. But it seems like they've been unresponsive for a while here.
David, if it's invalid, the ITL is invalid already and the ITP was rescinded, what is the decision that you need from ESRC today? What's the decision under consideration?
It's just to recommend that we rescind the ITL. I mean, technically we haven't rescinded it. It's still in place. So CO is, our HCP section is thinking that we should just rescind the ITL. So it's not just floating out there in space,
So just as a heads up, under federal law, the safe harbor agreement and the enhancement of survival permit follows the landowner, not the land. So at the time that the land was transferred, there's the option for us to reach out to the new landowner and see if they want to take on that agreement long-term, which we attempted to do, and we're not able to contact the new landowner. So at that point, the enhancement of survival permit and the safe harbor agreement ends on the federal side. On the state side, though, the agreement and the incidental take license follows the land, and so it exceeds the time of the landowner. Does that help, Melissa?
Yes, it does. Thank you. So when it's saying ITL is invalid, and since ITP was rescinded in 2020, although Dave is saying it wasn't rescinded in 2020, Is that referring to under federal or under state?
It is done on the federal side, and we have formally ended both the agreement and the enhancement of survival permit that occurs under the federal law.
Okay.
What's at issue today is the incidental take license under the state law.
Okay, thank you.
Right, so even though the safe harbor agreement expires in December, the incidental take license is still in effect. So technically, the landowner still has covered take on their land, which they're not doing anything to make the land more favorable to the species. So it's not ideal to have that license in effect if there's no.
Okay, so given all, can I make a motion to rescind the incidental take license for Umikoa Ranch?
Okay, so moved. Is there a second?
Well, clarify that, because I think that we don't rescind it. It's a recommendation to the board to do that.
So amended.
Second.
Okay, any discussion?
Yeah, I just want to jump in and say that since USGS is a federal research agency and we sit on the ESRC to provide biological and ecological information relative to issues coming to the committee, this agenda item seems to relate more to a regulatory issue, and so we're going to abstain from voting on it today. But we do agree with the concerns raised relating to the biological issues that have led to this recommendation being sent to the board.
Okay, thank
Took
you.
the words right out of my mouth, Jim.
Excuse
Go
me?
ahead.
Nope. I agree.
Okay, so USGS is going to abstain. Is there any other discussion?
Dave, I just had a question, and it probably isn't relevant to the vote, but I'm just curious, did this landowner get other land incentive programs from DOFA, kind of using this piece as a tool to enable them to get other funding sources, say for conservation easements or other forest restoration programs tied to other either federal or state restoration incentive programs?
I'm not sure.
Lisa, I think that they got NRCS funding, but that was quite a long time ago. I don't know for sure. I can look into it.
Okay, so no conservation easement was given in one of the forest stewardship or anything like that.
I don't
Not
think
that I'm
so.
aware of.
I think that's correct that they got some NRCS funding. That's my recollection at the time. I think Ducks Unlimited and Maui were working on this at the time, working with the ranch. And, quite frankly, you could just let this thing lie, it's essentially not in effect because they don't have an ITP. It's going to expire in December. I don't even know if we'll get it on the board by December, but our HCP program is just thinking that it would be, they'd like to just, tie up loose ends here and make that recommendation. So
I think it's important to put on the record that this landowner has been uncooperative with efforts to communicate with them.
yeah, I don't know about uncooperative. We just haven't been able to contact them. So, I'd be uncomfortable saying they're uncooperative when we haven't had any.
That's not in the motion. I didn't say anything about uncooperative in the motion, but I think it's good to have such things on the record.
Yeah, I mean, sometimes it's just difficult to reach some of these big multinational corporations, and especially when they're located in another country. So we're not sure why we're not able to get a hold of them, but we have not been. So, that's kind of a courtesy thing. Contact them, let them know that this is this is the direction that we're trying to take. And, the thing might just resolve itself. If we don't actually get this on the board before December, it's just going to expire come December. So I think it's kind of a housekeeping thing on the Habitat Conservation Program's part to try to just go ahead and rescind it, since it doesn't seem to be currently in effect due to the cancellation of the ITP. Any other discussion?
Well, I do think it's an important issue in terms of, because, you know, part of this is in response to the fact that we have not gotten any really information from the landowner in terms of annual reports and things like that for many, many years. And I think it is really important that we really show that the ESRC is looking at this information and needs it to, you know, decide whether you know, things are being managed in the way that they're lined out in the HCP or safe harbor. So I think it is important that a message is sent that this information is really quite, you know, crucial to you know, maintaining these agreements.
Yeah, agreed. And I think it's important. Yeah, like you say, it sort of draws to attention the fact that we need to be following up and monitoring these agreements. It's now been, you know, this is like the third year now that we haven't gotten a report. I think they said they got one in 18, so it's 19, 20, 21. That'd be the third year of not getting a report. We haven't been able to contact the new landowner. So, you know, it's just, in terms of monitoring these things, there's not really much going on with this one. So, and there hasn't been for some time. So it's one of those things that's just been kind of floating out there. But it does kind of point out the fact that we do need to monitor these agreements and licenses and permits.
Hi, this is
like
Ashleen. Oh,
Go ahead.
sorry. No, I just wanted to remind folks that even though the safe harbor expires at the end of this December, the way it was set up is that the ITL lasts for a lot longer. And so I think that's where it's really important that we weigh in on that permit.
Okay.
And this is a lot. So you were sending the communications using the same address and stuff that the state sends for, or the county sends for taxes and stuff like that, right?
I think to date, they've been working through the agent. So we'll try to, you know, we'll make another attempt to see if we can't contact them. Based on the Attorney General's recommendation, you know, we'll try to make that attempt again, so that we can report on that to the board one way or the other.
But I would still suggest we can continue on with our
I don't know
motion.
if Linda has any comment on it.
No, I mean, I offer to help the staff to try to get a better contact information for the new owner. We can probably do that through a Bureau of Conveyance record and such like that.
Okay, great.
Shane, am I correct that this just happened with PE Holo too? Is there anything that we need to do on that end?
Yeah, maybe that can be another topic in a future meeting. But that safe harbor agreement, that land that safe harbor agreement is on, was recently sold. So we are also working to reach out to that new landowner.
Thanks.
Okay, any other discussion? Okay, we have a motion and a second. All in favor? Maybe raise your hand. So let's see, for the purposes, so myself, Michelle, Loyal, let's see if I can get on my camera here. Lisa, USGS is abstaining, Kavika's yes. And I believe that's everyone. Is that right?
Melissa as well.
Oh, Melissa, I'm sorry. Didn't see it. There you go. Melissa voting yes. Okay, I think that's it. So all yes, except for USGS abstain. So the motion passes. Thank you very much. And we'll move this forward, work with the AG's office and move it toward the board. Thank you much. Okay, our fourth agenda item is a review of the FY20 annual report for the Kenai HCP. And the presenter is going to be Yap Izinga with SWCA. We have Betsy Wilson on call, and they're going to be talking about the mitigation work going on out there. So Yap, you want to go ahead?
Yeah, thanks, Dave. Committee, I hope everyone is doing well, staying safe. So I have some slides to share, so let me key those up real quick. Okay, here we go. Okay, sorry, I'm having some technical difficulties with both the presentation and Zoom. I apologize for the delay. Okay. Well, this should work. Thanks for your patience. I appreciate it. So we wanted to provide an update to the ESRC on mitigation measures, sort of a summary for 2020, since we haven't presented those to you all yet. And then also bring you up to speed on what's been done to date in 2021, since that year, 2020, 2021 actually just closed as well. And discuss with you the outcome of the mitigation to date. We'll start with a little bit of background information. So the project's currently owned by AKC Leasing Corporation. Betsy Wilson from AKC Leasing Corporation is on the line as well. The incidental take license allows for the take of 3 round leaf chafe flower. I know every time we talk about this project, somebody will ask, who named this thing? So maybe we'll just stick with Acarantes. 4 Acarantes planens, rotundata. So the HCP was written to offset the project impacts to 3 of these Acarantes on a small 3/4 acre industrial lot. I'll show a map here in an upcoming slide. The actual take at the time the lot was cleared was 2 individuals. We'll talk a little bit more about the plants on the site when we look at the map. Mitigation consisted of planting and then maintaining Acarantes at the Kalailoa unit of the Pearl Harbor National Wildlife Refuge. Those were grown in a nursery from genetic stock taken from the individuals at the project site, as well as from an additional nearby seed source, which I'll show. The goal for the mitigation duration was 5 years. So all of the success criteria were based on a mitigation project that had a 5-year duration. We're currently in the 7th year. So adaptive management phase. The mitigation site is all the way up here in the top left corner at Kemble Industrial Park in a section that's called Kenai Industrial Park. It's surrounded by heavy industrial use and zoned as such. The additional seed source is down here just south. I believe it's owned by city and county, and there's an additional population of Acarantes present at that site. And then in green over here is the National Wildlife Refuge, where the mitigation was taking place over the past few years. Just to zoom in on the project site, you can see it is it's a small lot. It's kind of sunken, especially in the middle, lower than the surrounding areas. Yeah, surrounded by heavy industrial use and no other contiguous vegetation around that area. So in 2013, the HCP was approved, and immediately seed collection started, and plants were grown. About 120 days later, plants were installed, and monitoring started. Started for 5 years, and then we've continued ever since. So even though you haven't heard from us this last year, the monitoring and maintenance has continued. So we'll start with the 2020 report. Oh wait, that's what I was going to say. I knew I skipped over something. I apologize. Just to go back to the project site. So this is a very small site, not contiguous. It had been known historically to have Acaranthus, and so there had been occasional surveys to see if any were present still. Cliff Morden did some surveys in the odd 2000s and found anywhere between 0 and 4 plants, I believe, was the most that he had found during those surveys. And so when we went before the HCP was finalized, we found 3, which is what the take request was based on. And then there were ultimately 2 when the vegetation was cleared. So in recent history, this site was sort of a site where there were some straggling individuals present, but not a particularly strong population. Just want to point that out. So from 2020, we see the original outplants has gone down the beginning of the, or at the beginning of this monitoring year, 2019-2020, went down from 35 down to 13 individuals. And we talked about the success criteria back in 2018 when we were in year 4, when we all realized that the HCP in its assumptions had been particularly optimistic with regard to the longevity of these plants. Turns out they really don't live very long, and 5 years is about what you can expect under harsh field conditions, as opposed to nursery conditions where they can thrive for a lot longer than that. And we have actually seen that as part of this project as well. So this is for 2020. At the end of the monitoring year, there were 13 of the original outplants left. And then the recruitment has continued and continued to go up. So while we lost about 22 individuals from the original outplants, we gained almost as many in recruitment. And these are individuals that are large enough to tag, which means that they're at least 6 inches tall. Most, possibly all, but I can't confirm that 100%, but most of these do also reproduce at this age class. And we have anywhere between, at the peak of flowering and fruiting, we have anywhere between 80 and 100% of the progeny flowering or fruiting. But there is a lot of variation there. So they don't all flower and fruit at the same time. And that's not tracked on an individual basis. So at the end of this monitoring year, we had 13 original outplants. We had 97 progeny for a total of 110 plants on site. Another success criteria is related to native plant cover, which varies quite a bit. Our data is a little bit skewed to the low side because the maintenance happens after the monitoring, so that the monitoring can provide guidance to the maintenance efforts. So there's some variability there, but with maintenance, depending on the timing, we have all plots within that 25% native plant cover. Just an example of what things look like here. We have quite a bit of recruitment, seedlings growing up. They like to grow up underneath these mature plants coming up. The main threat there with the recruitment is the bufflegrass Sancristiliaris that just grows quicker and takes over. And so that's a large part of the control efforts, is to control the Sancris from overgrowing those seedlings. Once they get into the mature stage, they are no longer as threatened by being overgrown by Sancris because they overtop it. And at that point, mealybugs do become still a threat to the longevity of those plants. So down below, you can see the lighter green here are the Acaranthes, and the lighter green, or the brighter green, I should say, are some Elema cytophalics, and in the foreground here, you see the encroaching bufflegrass. So, like I said, the HCP provides a description of mitigation for 5 years. And if mitigation measures haven't been met after 5 years, there would be adaptive management. The adaptive management consists of, continuing the work as planned, but specifically calls out as a first action planting additional Acaranthes in suitable areas at the refuge as a first step. And so that is what the project then did. In April 2020, we had discussed this with DOFA personnel. 60 plants that were in the nursery, 60 of the plants that were left in the nursery from the originally grown plants that survived and thrived in the nursery were planted in April 2020 as part of the adaptive management strategy. However, there was, for some reason, there was no follow-up on the care, and there was no water at the site at the time, which we were made aware of only after we found out that 0 of the plants had survived the ordeal pretty much within days, because they weren't watered in, and it was particularly hot and dry. They did not survive. So then we are left with those 210 plants that we had at the end of monitoring that year. So that's the summary for the 2020 annual report. Adaptive management did continue in 2021. There was a little bit of a lag. There was some reevaluating of management strategies at the site. There were some delays because of permit renewals. And once all of that was sorted out, AKC Leasing was able to access the site, continue weeding, and applying some safari for pest control, and also install some additional Acaranthes plants earlier this summer when water was available and they had repaired the irrigation system that was originally installed. 57 additional plants were installed in June 2nd, 2021. So as a result of the adaptive management in 2021, unfortunately, because of a little lag time, or maybe more than a little lag time, the number of progeny had gone down a little bit, but we still had very high survival in the intervening time. The original outplants, pretty much as expected, we ended up with 13 at the end of 2020, had gone down to 0. So we are now left with all progeny and then the additional outplants from this year. And that results in a total of 121 plants. Now, going to the success criteria, the first success criteria here is related to basically the survival, the longevity of the original outplants. And back in 2018, we all agreed that that was based on optimistic and faulty assumptions, and agreed that we would strike this success criterion and focus on the remaining success criteria. So in addition to that, there has to be recruitment of seedlings that survive in absence of any supplemental watering. So there's no irrigation that's aimed at the recruitment and at the progeny. Seed production by at least 25% of the outplanted lineages. We know that all of the plants that were outplanted had flowered for and produced seed for multiple years. They really are, as soon as they can and as soon as the conditions are right, the plants will flower and produce seeds prolifically. Then the number of seedlings recruited into mature age class must be greater than the mortality rate of existing adult plants, and a minimum recruitment of 25% of the number of outplanted individuals over a 5-year period. Now, I want to highlight that this was based on the assumption that 75% of the original outplants would survive. I'll come back to that. And then the most basic and straightforward metric here is no fewer than 120 mature plants, which includes plants recruited from the planted lineage. When we were discussing the success criteria when this HCP was approved, the main concern was related to recruitment. Are we actually going to see seedlings? Are those seedlings going to make it into the mature class? And are we going to have, are we going to see that? And are we even going to be able to make that 25%, which 25% of 120 being 30? And yeah, that's something that we met a long time ago and far exceeded in recent years. Then we have a success criterion based on the cover of herbaceous non-native plants, and native plant species covered being greater than 25% and no mature Kiawe. These are goals that have been met and are, to a degree, management dependent, of course. So considerations related to these success criteria. The HCP doesn't offer success criteria beyond year 5. Interestingly, and it does mention if the success criteria weren't met after year 5, that the first step would be additional outplanting, which was done both in 2020 and 2021, unsuccessfully and then successfully. Important to note, and something that we've skipped over in the past, is that the HCP actually specifically calls out a mitigation ratio of 30-1. As I mentioned earlier, at this site, depending on when you went and looked at the site, there may have been 1 plant, maybe 4, maybe 2, maybe 3, maybe none. And when originally the HCP was written, it was based on a presumed take of 4 plants, which at a mitigation ratio of 30-1 results in a success criterion of 120 plants. However, the take request ended up being 3 based on the count at that time of the number of plants at the site, which would actually make the success criterion at a 30-1 mitigation ratio 90 plants. The actual take at the site was 2, which would then make the mitigation ratio or the mitigation success criterion at a 30-1 mitigation ratio 60. I want to call that out because it speaks to the intent of the mitigation and the reasoning, I guess you could call it, behind the numbers in the success criteria. As I mentioned, the mitigation success criteria based on the criterion, the number 1 criterion, that 75% of the outplants would survive by year 5. We now know that none of them survived, but that means that the requirement and what would be considered success is based on 30 recruits, 30 progeny. And as we've seen, the project has far exceeded that expectation, which I think is one of the strongest indicators of success here of this mitigation project. And then to date, there's been a substantial effort to mitigate for the 2 plants that were taken at this site that, clearly is not a great site to have endangered species. Apparently, this is an important slide because my computer seems to be stuck on it as I'm trying to advance a slide.
Yeah.
Okay.
Could you clarify that last statement in terms of this is not a suitable site for endangered species?
Oh yeah, just the project site itself, since it was, if we go back to when I was working, if we go back to the maps, it's a very small site. It's surrounded by heavy industrial area. It's actually lower than the surrounding areas, which causes runoff into that site. And we actually looked, there was some standing water there. We looked at that water and it was absolutely impossible for anything to live in that water. And, dominated by a Kiave canopy, not the ideal site for, to call that habitats for recreations.
I apologize. I thought you were talking about the mitigation site.
Well, we jokingly refer to the mitigation site as Mordor. Danielle will get a chuckle out of me mentioning that because it's extremely hot and it's relatively close to Kalaeloa airport. And just because it's the conditions there are challenging, and it's quite amazing that these plants can grow and thrive in that environment. So from a subjective people going out there to monitor the plants perspective, maybe not, but the plants seem to be doing fine. They grow big and bushy, and there's a lot of recruitment. We have seedlings survive into mature age class, and so on. So ultimately, with the success criteria, we could have some discussion, but really what we would like to ask the committee is, considering the success criteria, considering the reasoning behind the success criteria, and the efforts expended to date to provide mitigation and to provide a net conservation benefit to the species, we would like to ask that we call it a success at 121 plants, consistent, I think, with the assumptions that the success criteria are based on, and close out the project.
I have some questions. So, yep, you mentioned, I think it was on the previous slide, you said something about 25% of lineages. I'm not quite understanding how that interfaces here, and I'm curious how you're tracking that.
So you're referring to this here, the native plant species. Oh wait, this one, seed production by at least 25% of the outplanted lineages by year 5.
Yes.
I'm not entirely sure what the intent was by calling them lineages, because there are only 2 sites that the plants were collected from. 2 plants from the project site, and then additional plants, and I don't know exactly how many. I would have to go on the records, which I'm sure exists, of that city and county site. And so technically you would talk about 2 lineages at best, probably just 1. And so I'm not sure how you would measure that, but because we know that all of the outplanted individuals produce seeds, I don't think that's a concern.
I think the lineages, if I'm remembering correctly, are referring to the founders from the original population, not just sites.
Okay.
So how many founders do we have left? There was a drastic reduction in after that drought.
So the founders from the original site, there were 2 that seeds were collected from, and then half of the plants that were outplanted came from those 2 plants, and none of them survive at this point. All the plants that are there now are progeny, except for the ones that were planted as part of the adaptive management, which are presumably 50% from those collected lineages.
Do you have any idea how many filial generations it's been since F1?
We do not. We don't track. We're not able to track that because we simply have no idea what plant the seeds would have come from that results in seedlings that are then tagged once they're old enough. So we're not able to track that. We also don't know which of the outplanted plants came from what seed.
Okay, I have a question for Matt here, if that's okay. Matt, can you speak to the presence or absence of this species in seed banking efforts in Laukahi?
Hey, Kavika. Yeah, these individual plants that came from the mitigation site are represented in storage at Lion Arboretum, as are the plants that are at the city, county, and island recycling site that he also showed on the map. And my understanding was that they're not able to track the lineages by seed production because, as Yap mentioned, they did not track which outplants came from which seed stock. So because they were not tagged and tracked by individual, they're not able to say which lineages produce seeds. But if all the outplanted plants produced viable seeds, which I haven't actually seen that, maybe they produced flower, but I'm not sure that seed collections and viability testing was done.
No, it wasn't.
But the assumption is that that seeds are being produced on site. And I just want one thing you had while I have my mic open. You had mentioned that the DOFA recommendation was to continue the mitigation planting. I just would note that we recommended you plant in the winter of 2019 during the rainy season. I noticed your outplanting dates were in April 2020, and then there was no follow-up watering. And then you planted again in June. And I guess that doesn't follow what we recommended. So I just wanted to clarify that.
Thank you. That's noted. And of course, survival would be expected to be best when outplanting happens early in the rainy season. There were delays particular to site preparation, water availability, and permit reactivation.
And then I know we've covered this in previous meetings, but we have lots of other examples of plants living for much longer than this, and wild plants and outplanted plants in other areas at Kaina Point and nearby at the seed source. We've tracked wild plants that have stayed alive at the city and county and island recycling plant sites for much longer than this. We have 6- and 8-year-old plants there now, and plants that have been installed into your mitigation site at the National Wildlife Refuge. There are hundreds of plants that have lived for 4 years now in that outplanting effort. So we I understand that yours weren't able to live that long, and I note that there were pest problems, but I don't think that is an indicator that the original lifespan estimates for this species are incorrect, given all the other examples we have of much longer lived plants. Thanks.
Hi, I have a question.
Yeah, hi, Gordon.
Yeah, hi. So just so I understand, so the site currently is set up to provide water to the plants? How is that done?
Yeah, there is a water source that is it's not an automatic irrigation system. It has to manually be turned on and off, and it's a drip system aimed at the outplanted individuals.
Okay, and would the plan be to maintain that? I mean, it seems like without water at the site, the plants are toast. So is the plan be to maintain that irrigation system?
It is currently being maintained. I don't.
What about?
Yeah. I can't speak to the plan. I guess it depends a little bit on the current conversation, but I would agree that the plants would have the highest chance of survival through another season if there's some additional irrigation until they're fully established and we get closer to the rainy season.
But just to clarify, you don't, that's not a constant watering system. That's only when you do your initial planting.
Correct. And that's one of the problems that we had getting the outplanting done. We weren't aware. We weren't aware that the irrigation system was not functional. And so the plants were installed and we basically found out that there was no irrigation when we found them dead, when we did the monitoring. We did not do the outplanting ourselves. And so one of the delays was ensuring that we would have a water source and we were able to use that at the refuge, and that the irrigation system was fixed so that a drip system could be installed for those outplants that were done this year. It certainly wasn't the plan to plant them this late.
So do you believe that the adults can survive without irrigation at this site? Have any?
The adults that were just planted? I mean, obviously
Well,
the progeny is surviving and is reproducing without any irrigation, and the outplants, I don't know, Gordon. I would have to check with Danielle to see if she has a strong opinion on it.
Okay, thank you.
Yep, a question.
Yeah.
There's an awful lot of management that goes on, particularly weeding now. I mean, once plants are established and you say the water is not active anymore for the young ones that are growing up, you do an awful lot of management with weeding and so forth. If you were to stop that today in 5 years, what would the site look like?
I can't speak to that. It depends on what Fish and Wildlife Service does. I'm sure there are going to be plants surviving and reproducing. We had quite a bit of delay in management at the site because of expired permits for one, and other logistical challenges, crew changes. We also 2020 we went quarterly, and so there wasn't a very intense management scheme at that time. So I couldn't tell you what it would look like if all management ceased, but the plan was that the refuge was going to take over management as they are working in other areas and have actually, I mean, this site has been identified as a key site for the recovery of the species, and it's within their goals to continue management of the site. But at that point, it's out of our client's hands.
Yeah, no, I was really more referring to just more the ecological process and so forth, not really directly to the safe harbor or the HCP, excuse me.
Yeah.
One thing to consider is potentially, I mean, because right now it seems like your biggest culprit, besides the insect infestations, are the grasses and verbicina and so forth. Is there maybe a strategy to try and increase the amount of other woody native species such as Mori lima, a'ali'i, and a few other species around that, even as a buffer around the sites? Again, we're not looking for a population which is a monoculture of Acaranthes. I mean, having it grow within a mix of other species, and especially if you get woodies in there, that's going to help reduce the invasion by the grasses. It's just a strategy that might be considered, that actually might be more beneficial and less maintenance needed to be done relative to grass weeding.
Right. Yeah, there's definitely a mosaic of plants in the area where, maybe this picture isn't the best, but it does show interspersed Ilima as well as the Acaranthes. And yeah, there's Nio at the site, and and some other native species, ground covers like Jacomontia, that are in the area. And with the management that has been done, those have been able to take over larger areas around the outplantings in particular where that management occurred. But, you know, frankly, if you look at this picture, you know, the refuge, I'm sure, is well aware of it, is that the Sancris is, it basically fills in any area that it can, and it's quite aggressive. And so it's a part of the refuge management strategy to try and suppress that.
Yeah, we've had similar discussions relative to other species, of Butylon particularly, and you know, bringing in other thoughts and so forth. I mean, you know, the work that, for example, you know, Butch Haas has done over on Molokai with, you know, similar types of habitats dealing with similar grasses, including, you know, in addition with other ones there too, you know, with a real mix of species able to really again, reduce the amount of maintenance for, you know, grass weeding and so forth. And so, you know, I think the intent is of an HCP of a mitigation is not so much to, you know, get the plants in the ground and then you get to a certain level and you can check the box and say that's done. I mean, the intention is really in the long term is to be able to, you know, have a self-sustaining with relatively limited maintenance population of the target species within a matrix of other species, you know, again, not just a garden kind of thing. And so that's why, you know, always, you know, trying to explore these strategies that would extend the viability of populations, you know, beyond the duration of the license.
Yeah, I understand from a recovery perspective, that would definitely be the goal, but the goal of an HCP isn't specifically meant to take on specific recovery goals. The purpose of an HCP is to offset the incidental take of the listed species, and in the case of the state statute, offer a conservation net benefit. I would say taking 2 plants in an area that was not hosting a large population, possibly stable, I don't know, but with a very small number of plants. And I think replacing that in an area that is protected by, you know, having a much larger number of over a mitigation ratio of 30-1, even if we just look at the recruits at this point, at the progeny, I think that meets the criteria.
Yeah, no, I wasn't really trying to address that, but that part of it is just, you know, again, you know, the intention is not to just simply have a temporary offset. It's to have something which is a little longer standing offset, which, you know, hopefully would be, you know, the net benefit being the fact that would continue on even better than at the original site. And that's why I was, you know, trying to, you know, bring up ideas in terms of, you know, other types of plantings and so forth. And again, this is not necessarily directed at the HCP obligations specifically, okay, but it's just more the, you know, the longer term thing there. You know, but again, the intention really is not just a temporary checkoff offset. It is something which, you know, hopefully is going to last longer. And that's a combination of that is also the net benefit.
Noted, and thanks for that. Thanks for the clarification there, and that is primarily too why this site was chosen, is a protected site that has management. I mean, with the current prevalence of invasive species like Sancris, these coastal sites are, you know, can be pretty challenging for a lot of the native plants, and especially the rare ones. So.
Yeah, but just a follow-up question from Jim's. So the assumption is that the original population with mature individuals, those were persisting at least, if and the assumption is self-sustaining. And so the goal, as I listen to you present on the criteria, it all seems a way of defining what a self-sustaining population looks like. The goal is to develop a self-sustaining population elsewhere, and all those criteria are kind of the ways by which it was assumed that you could judge a self-sustaining population had been developed. Looking at the numbers, I'm not a plant person. And so to me, I look at those numbers and I go, well, that doesn't look self-sustaining. But, if we walk away from this, is it going to persist into the future? I realize that's not your job. The HCP had a defined time limit. But I'm just wondering if you can speak to that. Do you feel this is self-sustaining? And if we walk away from this, is it going to persist into the future? Or does it need continued input of resources to survive into the future? The mitigation population in particular.
Yeah, that's definitely a good question. I appreciate it. Well, we have had periods with very little maintenance, and there is definitely a level of fluctuation in how many plants survive and how much recruitment you have. I can't say that we have enough data to say that that's management dependent, but it would be logical to think that more management would result in higher survival rates and higher reproductive output. Or at least a high recruitment. So management will definitely help, but we have stepped away, and we've had very intermittent maintenance as well. And even during a period of time when we were, I'll see if I can find this slide, because I think that there's a progression here. So during these, as I understand it, during this time, the 2020 report, maintenance and monitoring was done quarterly. And we had a pretty strong increase here in progeny. So I think, yes, it will persist. And I think that it'll persist better than it did at the original project site. I did not see that as a particularly good place for a persisting population. And then at one point it was thought to have actually gone away and gone extinct. So it does show some of the resiliency of this plant. But yeah, I do think it will persist, but the future of this mitigation site, the assumption was, based on input from the refuge at that time, that they would apply some management. And I think some management is sufficient to ensure that the population will persist.
Great, thank you.
So yeah, this is Loyal. So a couple questions.
Hey, Loyal.
So on the 121 plants, were those all progeny?
No. This is the 2021 outcome. So there were 64 progeny at that time.
Okay, so yeah, 64. Okay, and I do want to take issue with your characterization of the quote unquote original population site. That was in itself was also a mitigation for another pre-HCP project in that area when there was a larger population on that, and roughly half a 1 acre site that was the mitigation site that we're now compensating for was small, but the substrate was one of the original coral limestone substrates. The area around it was built up multiple feet high when the area was developed. So it's in a very unnatural hole that was not based upon the original characterization of the site, but on the development that occurred around it. So let's be clear on that. There was only a few plants there, and we're now mitigating for those few plants when we wanted to eliminate the previous mitigation site. So it wasn't a bad site that the plants were in. Their site got worse because of what happened around it. So for the report that you're giving today, there's a lot of good information in it, and I like that. And the fact that we have 64 progeny that have been surviving without irrigation is nice. I do want to make sure that to find out what the plants that you put out in 2020 and 21, particularly the 2021 ones, whether or not the irrigation on that is going to be close enough to influence the progeny plants. Because then that's going to give us a skewing of what's going on with the mitigation site.
Right. I think originally the irrigation was set up in a way that the water was spread out more, and it was adjusted based on recommendations to a drip system that would affect the outplants. Now, outplants are a little bit away from the, as I understand it, a little bit away from the areas of the original outplants and the progeny.
Good. Okay, great.
Yep, and another question I've got is, can you sort of give an indication of how much interaction your project folks have had with the refuge folks? In other words, how has the refuge been at all involved directly in any of the management? Are they ready to take the baton and move forward, or can you sort of characterize that relationship?
Yeah, sure. There's been, as you know, a lot of turnover and changes in refuge management. And so the people that we talked to back when this project started are not the people that are, for the most part anyway, there are some original folks still there that we talked to. The interaction that we have is, well, it's been letting them know what we're doing and when, and always giving them a heads up. So we're in close coordination with them about what's actually happening at the refuge, and then extending our special use permit to actually do this work at the refuge. It has not touched much on subsequent management once the project closes out.
Okay, thanks.
Yeah, I have a question about the 30-to-1 ratio. I'm sorry, I've been looking through my files and I can't find the HCP. So I'm not sure what it says on page 27. I'm wondering if you could walk us through what that 30-to-1 ratio means, please.
Yeah, let me see if I can, oh, I'm sharing the screen. So I think if I pull up the, I can probably pull it up if you have a second. Is that all right?
Me.
Or you want me to? Otherwise, I can read it to you. I can just
way.
pull it up.
Yeah, walking us through it. I'm sure there are other people on the call or watching on YouTube that don't have it handy either.
Yep. Good. Let me pull it up real quick. Let's see. There we go. Okay. The technology is great, but it does result every once in a while in a little bit of a delay, and I apologize for that. But it does allow me to share with you what the HCP actually says. So it's a highlighted section over here in the very long mitigation design section.
I'm not seeing it, sorry.
You're not seeing?
I see it.
I see it.
Okay, excellent. Sorry, I was scrolling a little fast, so maybe that messed things up. But it says by offsetting the incidental take of 3 round leaf chafe flowers at a 30-to-1 ratio, this project will provide a positive contribution to the recovery of the species.
Okay, that's very helpful. Thank you. I still don't understand what's the 30 and what's the 1. Is that 30 survivors to 1 founding individual?
Yeah. Yeah, otherwise we'd be talking partial plants. So I would, the 30 is the mitigation, and the 1 is the incidental take.
Okay, so therein lies the cumulative net benefit is for every take, you're adding 30 individuals to the population, correct?
At least, correct.
Okay, that's helpful to me. So now that I have a better understanding of that, could you go back to that mitigation side and just quickly walk us through that aspect one more time, please?
Sure. What specifically did you want to see?
Maybe demonstrate the 30 to 1. Is that what you're asking?
Oh, okay,
for?
yeah. Yeah, so, I mean, it is the incident take request was 3. At a 30-to-1 ratio, that would be 90 plants. And at a actual take of 2, that would be 60. So that's what, if that had been correctly applied when this was finalized, the success criteria would look like.
Okay, thank you. All right, sorry, are you able to pull up that slide one more time, just so I can see it too?
Sure, let me pull that up. Go. Well, I mean, even at a 120, you know, technically, I mean, there's different ways to look at this, right? I would say you have at the end of 2020, there were 110 total plants, including some original plants. In 2021, we actually had 121. So if we were to take the progeny, which is 64, the assumption originally that all of the other success criteria were based on being a 75% survival, so a minimum of 25% of the 120 replacement by progeny, that would be 30, then that was exceeded here. So the expectations there, I mean, to me, this is the most exciting part about this project, is those expectations were well exceeded, and they have been exceeded years ago. If we were to consider these outplants the replacements of the original outplants, so what the assumption was based on, this still isn't 75% of 120, but it does total to 121, which is the hard number that's in the success criteria. If you're looking at it from a 30-to-1 replacement, assuming a take request, if we're just taking it to take request, ignoring the fact that only the actual incidental take was reportedly only 2, then the progeny themselves account for that 30-to-1 ratio.
Thank you, appreciate that.
Yeah.
Yeah, I got a question. I'm going to kind of put Matt on the spot here a little bit, but just from a DOFA agency perspective, and I just wanted to get the professional opinion from Matt as the state botanist. Does he feel that you know, that the work done to date has offset the mitigation? Or offset the take? Does the mitigation work to date offset the take at the site, and has that increased the likelihood of the recovery of the species? And sorry to put you on the spot, Matt, but I'm just curious from our agency perspective if we're comfortable with that.
Hey, Dave. Yeah, I can. I just would highlight something that Loyal said, is that the value of the site is beyond the two plants that were taken in the construction, because of the plants that have been recruited through the years. He said, numerous plants were there. So there is a soil seed bank that was in place at that mitigation site. So beyond just those 2 plants, that would be the other thing of value that should be mitigated for. So I think having a 30-to-1 ratio based on 3 as the take request would be fair, given that the soil seed bank was also taken. So something to value that there. But as far as the trade-off, I do agree that there has been a substantial effort to date, and this has resulted in a successful establishment of long-lived progeny at the site that have been dozens, up to 64, and that has been a positive trade-off for the take of the original site. So I think that the seeds that are in storage also as a backup offset the potential for this small site to be to continue to decline, that they are backed up, the genetics have been saved. So that has also been accounted for. And it will be incorporated into the management at the refuge, and it will be management dependent. We need to continue to remove the kiawe and control pests. Right now, Nile thrips are massively changing the landscape out there, and we're going to have a much different plant community at the refuge. So I think as long as we continue to work with our partners at Fish and Wildlife Service to manage the threats there as can, that the plants established through this project will continue to help with the recovery of these species.
Okay, thanks.
Thanks, Matt.
The intention of this agenda item today was really to review the progress, and particularly the annual report. So I presume, with the suggestions you're making, that at a future meeting in the near future, we'll see an agenda item to see whether this project has met its obligations relative to the HCP. At that time, when we get to that point, when we're talking about this again, I would really appreciate having either the Fish and Wildlife Refuge manager or that person's representative also be present in the meeting to give us an update in terms of, again, how the results of this effort will be passed on to the refuge, and how they're planning on working with it. That would be really useful in terms of comfort level, in terms of a more perpetual solution rather than just we met the goals and walk away. So I just request we make that ask of refuges to participate in that meeting.
Okay, I'm more than happy to facilitate and work with them to try and get someone to participate in that meeting then. But I do want to reiterate that the decision about this HCP shouldn't be contingent on the actions of the Fish and Wildlife Service.
No, that's not what I was
Okay.
suggesting. I just want to make sure there's some idea of, so that we on the committee have got some understanding of the continuity of this effort.
Yeah, that sounds great. And yeah, we can facilitate that.
Good. Are there any other questions?
No, but I was just going to say, I think the report is thorough and it's good and it's fairly easy to go through and digest. I may not necessarily agree with all the conclusions with respect to meeting criteria, but this is a pretty good, thorough report from my perspective.
Appreciate that. Thanks a lot.
Yeah, and I'd like to agree with that, and say that it is optimistic to see that there actually is recruitment. This is more than we have with other plant species we're dealing with on the ESRC. And it's good to see this. Again, how it's going to manifest in the long run is what my interest is overall.
All right, thanks, Jim.
Okay, any other comments or questions?
I do want to agree with Yap that we need to be looking at what the HCP says, not what we want recovery to be. And he's right. It's Fish and Wildlife Service said they were going to take this over. That's not the HCP applicant's problem if there's a hiccup in that handoff, in my mind. But we go by what's written in the HCP.
Okay, thanks, Lou. Appreciate it.
Any other comments, questions? Okay. Well, thank you very much. The agenda item was the ESRC review of the HCP for this 2020 annual report. So I appreciate you getting us up to speed on that. And And we will follow up. It's not a voting item or anything right now, so we'll just, if there's no other questions or comments, we'll go ahead and move on.
Can we request a short break?
Yeah, why don't we take, what do you want, 5-10 minutes?
Say 10 minutes.
Okay, 10 minutes. I currently have 10:32, so why don't we come back at 10:42?
Yeah, we're waiting for Taya Penniman. She said she couldn't present till 11, so we'll be ready to go once she's on and has her presentation ready. So
Yeah, do we want to wait or we want to just move into the Hoary bat instead of just sitting around for 20 minutes, half an hour?
she can be ready. I just
she
have
can be
let
ready.
her know. Yeah.
Okay, if she's not ready, we'll go on to item 6. If she is ready, then we'll start with her presentation.
Okay, sounds good.
Okay, great. See you in 10 minutes. Now 10:33, so 10:43. Okay. Thanks.
Hey, good morning, Teo. We're on a 10-minute break, so we'll be back around 10:43.
Okay, great. Thanks.
Actually, I will leave them.
Hey, Taya. Good to see you.
Hey, Jim, how are you?
I'm doing good. I'm doing good.
Excellent.
You tell us about mosquitoes, birds.
Yeah, to an audience that I'm sure knows quite a bit about them already.
Well, hopefully we can provide some additional support as a
Yeah.
committee. That'd be good.
Hope
Looking
so.
forward to that.
Awesome.
We should be back on again in a minute or two.
Great.
How are you, Taya?
Good. How are you, Michelle?
Doing well. I'm sorry I missed last week. I heard it was a good meeting.
Okay.
Okay, welcome back. Thank you much. Hey, Taya, see you're on. That's good. Okay, getting back to the agenda here, item number 5 is a bird snot mosquitoes project update by Tia Pinneman of the American Bird Conservancy. She's going to give us a status and overview of the effort to control mosquito populations in Hawaii to prevent the spread of avian malaria and extinction of Hawaiian forest birds. This is an informational presentation. And so we'll let Tia present, and then we'll have a chance for some questions and question answer period afterwards. So Tia, welcome, and go ahead.
Great, thank you, David. It's a pleasure to be here. I will go ahead and share my screen if I can. And always that challenge. Stop for a second.
Had it for a second there.
Yep. But then I can grab it. Oh, I don't want that. Sorry. You don't want the whole thing.
Too much information.
Yeah, really. Okay. All right, I think we're good. So aloha, and thank you for the opportunity to indeed share some updates on our collaborative efforts to stop the spread of avian malaria in Hawaii. First off, I appreciate how deeply knowledgeable and committed each of you is, and just want to say thank you for all that you do in your day-to-day work and for your service on the ESRC. It is a super important process. Also, given the breadth of knowledge that already exists here, I don't intend to talk about, yep. That's weird. Are you all hearing that?
I'm not hearing anything but you, and I see the screen.
Okay, for some reason I'm getting our previous conversations before.
Do you have your YouTube open? You mute the
Oh,
YouTube.
maybe.
Yeah.
How do I turn that off?
It'll give you a bounce.
Let's try to turn all that. I'll just close that out. Okay, try again. Thanks for giving me that hint. Okay, that's better. So I don't intend to cover the, I know you know the significance, the biological and cultural significance of our forest birds, and so I don't intend to go into that at all. I want to highlight the current status of some of our species and briefly describe the Wolbachia-based strategy, and then provide updates on where we are in the process, including our community engagement efforts. And then, as you noted, David, leave time for some questions. I want to start by noting that this project is focusing primarily on our honey creepers, at least initially. The endangered forest bird species also include Oahu elapile and Puaohi, but avian malaria is not really understood to be the main cause of their decline. We also are focusing really on the main Hawaiian Islands, because the two honey creepers and the miller bird found in Northwest Hawaiian Islands are in places where there aren't any mosquitoes. So of the 15 species of honey creepers in the main islands, 8 of them have been listed as endangered under both Hawaii and federal law. And however, field observations from Kauai suggest that 2 more species, the Aniani owl and the Kauai amakihi, are also showing significant declines. This means that the full 2/3 of our honey creepers are in peril now. Of course, this is not news to any of you, and a huge amount of work has occurred and continues to occur to address some of the other causes of these declines. Habitat restoration, invasive species, predator control, et cetera, including in some places on Maui and Kauai, direct efforts for direct control of mosquitoes. Unfortunately, what we're seeing is that there's an acceleration in the loss of birds. One stark example comes from Kauai, where Akikiki in the core area that Kauai forest bird has been surveying over the years. In 2015, there were 35 breeding pairs. By 2018, that had dropped to only 27. And much more concerning is that this year they only found 3 breeding pairs. So this is really quite devastating news. The species considered to be the most in peril across the islands are the Akikiki, the Akeke, the Anyanya, Kauai Amakihi, as I mentioned, and on Maui, the Kiwikiu and a Koekoe. Population estimates from 2018 revealed very low numbers for these 2 species on Kauai. Field surveys are finding similar reductions in bird numbers for at least 2 species on the island of Maui. These data are from 4 years ago, and researchers believe that these population estimates are probably low. Surveys are also showing continued range contractions consistent with the movement of mosquitoes into the higher elevation forests. So the chief cause of these declines is avian malaria, vectored by the invasive Culex quinquefasciatus mosquitoes. The warming temperatures that we're seeing under climate change are pushing the mosquito zone higher into the last refugia for our forest birds. And surveys on the islands of Kauai and Maui are finding the Culex mosquitoes at densities and elevations never seen before. The forest bird surveys and extensive work on mosquito ecology and malaria by USGS and others spans decades. So we know that these observations are grounded in solid science. What's different now is that a tool exists to stop the loss of these endemic species. Following the 2016 World Conservation Congress held in Hawaii, the 2-day workshop called Mosquito Free Hawaii brought together international experts to consider biotechnological solutions. And they recommended the use of Wolbachia mosquitoes as the best tool to help save our birds. After that workshop, staff from a number of federal and state agencies and non-governmental organizations began meeting to explore this option. The partnership, now called Birds Not Mosquitoes, developed over time and now includes 3 federal agencies, 3 state agencies, 7 non-governmental organizations, and 1 private sector business. Individually and collectively, the partners are actively working to bring an effective mosquito control to Hawaii. Skip that. So how does it work? Wolbachia is a naturally occurring intracellular bacterium that lives in the cells, that lives in the tissues of more than half of the arthropods of the world. It is found here in Hawaii in both native and introduced insects. And if the male and female hosts of Wolbachia carry different strains, different incompatible strains of this bacteria, the eggs that result from their matings won't hatch. Rearing and releasing only male mosquitoes with the incompatible strain will suppress mosquito populations in the wild over time, thereby reducing the transmission of avian malaria. We know this process can work. It's being used in over 10 countries across the world to address human health issues, human diseases transmitted by mosquitoes, with no reported negative health or environmental impacts. In the US, it's even been used on a commercial scale to assist homeowners in reducing the number of Aedes albopictus in their yards. The EPA has previously approved its use for Aedes albopictus. Use of this tool in Hawaii, however, would be its first application for a conservation purpose. So we know that in order to be effective, it has to be implemented at a landscape scale. What's the process to get there, and what are the key elements? So right now we have a successfully developed Hawaii-based line of mosquitoes with an incompatible strain that was developed in a lab in the continental US. Before any releases can occur, there must be compliance with a suite of federal and state regulatory requirements. The state and federal agencies involved also must complete the applicable NEPA and HEPA assessment processes. On the state side, the Hawaii Department of Ag requires a number of permits to bring the trans-infected line of mosquitoes into Hawaii. And I'm sure, as many of you know, an initial import permit to do that was approved by HUA earlier this summer. Under federal laws, using a lab-based strain of incompatible mosquitoes to suppress mosquitoes in the wild is considered a type of biopesticide, and that has to be registered before it can be used. So field trials will be conducted under an EPA experimental use permit, and that would be used to help show the efficacy and the safety of the tool before seeking full registration as a biopesticide under the EPA. So this slide shows our projected timeline, and under the best case scenario, we would be looking at not a best case scenario, but a hopeful or an optimistic scenario. I think we'd be looking at landscape scale releases in 2024. But because we know our birds are in such peril, we also are exploring the idea of an emergency exemption under the EPA, which would allow us to release the mosquitoes on the landscape while simultaneously continuing to seek a biopesticide registration. Other major aspects of this project include continuing to conduct research on the densities of mosquitoes, the prevalence of avian malaria, and the genetic connectivity of mosquito populations to ensure that we're targeting the mosquitoes that are infecting our forest birds. The overall challenge is to deliver the right number of competitive males at the right locations and with the right frequency. We're exploring the best options for mass rearing of mosquitoes. It may make sense initially to import adult incompatible males while we develop the rearing capacity in the islands. We're also researching how best to get the mosquitoes where they need to go. Drones have been used elsewhere in the world for Wolbachia-based mosquito projects, and Hawaii, of course, has a long history of conservation work using helicopter application methods, where feasible ground-based deployment will also be used. To be successful, we need to release mosquitoes at regular intervals, indefinitely, although we anticipate that the number required will decrease as the population is suppressed. This is not a one and done type of project. We are committing for the long run. Without that commitment, we will certainly lose some species and possibly most of the remaining fauna of our forests. We also are building community support for the project, including creating and deepening the human connection with our forest birds. We're doing this through a variety of approaches. In some cases, the conversations have been one-on-one with individual community leaders. In other ways, through broader yet focused gatherings, although of course, for now, these are all being done virtually. We will be connecting with those who will be connecting with those who use the forests, including traditional practitioners who gather plant materials, hunters looking to feed their families, or botanists and bird watchers. We also are connecting with policy leaders and those whose missions intersect with our project. And yes, we also are engaging with those who might oppose the strategy for whatever reason. Some of the challenges that we face include the reality that our birds are now so limited in their distribution that very few people really know them. Our full-time outreach associate has been developing a robust social media presence along with other aspects of outreach to help address that concern. An additional challenge is the erroneous assumption that this technique will alter the genetic structure of mosquitoes, or that our native fish, birds, or one bat species depend on mosquito larvae or adults, and also that humans or other animals could be infected by this new strain, even though Wolbachia is not known to infect humans, and we will only be releasing males which will bite. We have the science to address these concerns, but as we are seeing so clearly these days, science-based reasoning doesn't always carry the day. We're working to ensure that the voices of Kanaka Maui, Native Hawaiians help guide our work. Our vision is that one day our forest birds could be so numerous that their feathers could once again be woven into the hulu and their songs heard and treasured across the islands. In closing, I leave you with these images of 12 species of Hawaiian honey creeper. They all face the threat of extinction unless we take urgent action to remove disease-carrying mosquitoes from our forests. Mahalo. Happy to answer questions.
Okay, thanks, Tara. Appreciate that. Yeah, it's I think it was brought into sharp focus when we tried to do the translocation of the parrot bills on Maui this last year, and all but one of the birds perished. And we thought it's been kind of common understanding that mosquitoes haven't been able to get above 4,000 feet. And that was at 5, and they all got malaria. So whether they had it when they were moved or there was other mitigating factors, but it appears that mosquitoes are definitely getting above that 4,000 foot level and starting to have really serious negative impacts on the bird populations. And of course, Kauai is right at that 4,000 or so. So they don't have any room anymore. And also because of the nature of a cone and the area involved, your biggest impacts are going to happen with the first movement up the hill in terms of elevation. So we're really in dire straits right now. The birds, some birds have been able to develop resistance, but certainly not all of them. And it doesn't look like for them it's going to happen in time. So this mosquito project is absolutely crucial to saving several species of endangered birds. Quite honestly, there's several species that it might be too late, but we're hoping we can roll this out in time and that it will be effective enough to recover those species where the numbers have dwindled significantly, including the 2 species on Kauai and the kiwikiu. So anyway, appreciate it. ABC has been a real valuable partner in this and is committed to doing all they can to help us address this crisis and species management. And we really appreciate their involvement, and then all the other agencies that we're working with trying to get this tool developed and imported and licensed and registered. So big multi-agency and multi-organizational effort, and really appreciative of everybody's efforts. So with that, if there's any other questions, comments from the committee?
Yeah, aloha Tea.
Oh,
Thank
go
you
ahead.
so much. Oh, sorry, go ahead, Kavika.
Oh, after you.
Okay, so Tea, thank you so much for your presentation. David, I think I have a number of follow-up questions, but to make sure that I'm in line with what our goals are for today in particular and what we need to do, can you just clarify for me, what is the decision that we are being asked to make today within ESRC, just so that I can constrain my questions to that context?
Okay, we're not making a decision today. It's just an informational presentation. So anything, taking advantage of the fact that Tea's here and can either answer questions or she can help get back to us if there's some things that she's not sure of. So It's just informational, non-decisional.
Thank you. That's helpful. So my initial, I don't have a problem with the technology that's currently being deployed, and I understand the dire situation and that this is a relatively safe but a stopgap measure that really only addresses things at a local scale. It's you mentioned landscape scale, but to do it at a landscape scale, my understanding is the technology is not necessarily there for doing it, basically producing enough mosquitoes to deploy at scale. I'm wondering if you can just briefly speak to your thoughts. This is a big question. Your thoughts on which actions are needed that we need to be taking if we actually want to have forest birds into the future for my kids to be able to see and show their kids.
So you're asking beyond this tool is what you're requesting?
Yes, my understanding is this is more of a stopgap. This isn't necessarily going to get us where we need to go. There's a number of other actions that need to be taken alongside these, and probably fairly quickly if we actually want to see these birds persist into the future.
Yeah, and I would be hesitant to try to speak to that. There's so many different groups that are actively working on protecting our forest birds. It's the sharpest minds in the state, in the nation for a lot of these issues that are working on that issue. So that one slide that I showed talking about habitat restoration, active control, and predator removal, and even the captive rearing, I think all of those, that whole suite of activities are important to keep doing. Of course, some people are exploring the question of gene drive, the opportunity or that option of gene drive, and that's not something that that Birds Not Mosquitoes is actively pursuing, although some members of the group are. And so, but I also will share with you just an observation that we heard at our steering committee the other day when we were talking about the fact that the one of the kiwikiu birds was detected, as I'm sure we all know, some time later, and all of the birds that had moved there had been tested before they were moved, and they had avian malaria. And Dennis LaPointe from USGS opined or observed that our species, some species can actually be capable of fairly rapid adaptation, and the pressures to do so are enormous right now. And so, yes, it's stopgap, but we are seeing adaptation of some of our species, some of our honey creepers, tolerance or adaptation to it. So I don't know if I answered your question, but I think yes, it is a broad one, and I think we have the best people working to address that.
Yeah, thank you. What I'm looking for is it's become really clear to me in conversations with folks as part of your organization. Luca out of my lab is now working for you guys, and as I was providing references for her, I took the opportunity to ask some questions of your folks, and it became really, really clear that it doesn't matter how much rat control, mongoose control, all of that you do. If you don't take care of the mosquito problem, at some point you lose the number of birds. And so, and because of the mosquitoes being detected at the highest elevations of some of our islands now, we're clearly out of time for thinking for a long time about it. We need to take action sooner rather than later and be a little efficient with that decision making. So I'm interested, again, whenever I have the opportunity, to hear from folks who are in your position about what those actions are that are needed. Yes, habitat restoration is important, all those things are important, but there's some really much harder things to do, such as potentially gene drives, potentially, other things to more broadly direct the mosquito issue, address the mosquito issue that we need to get to, and we need to get to quickly. So that's my reason for asking. So thank you for taking a shot at answering that. I think Kavika had a question, and I don't want to take up too much time before getting back to your question.
Yeah, thank you, Taya, for your presentation. It brought up a question for me that might actually be more appropriate to be pointed to DOFA staff. Just wondering about the current status of amakihi. I thought it was endangered, is it not?
Amakihi are actually, they are showing none of the amakihi are listed as endangered. The Kauai amakihi is showing pretty serious declines, and so I think folks on Kauai think it probably should be listed. But the amakihi is one of the species that has developed an apparent tolerance to avian malaria, and that's why we're seeing it in some of the lower elevations. Actually, the Oahu amakihi. Sorry, I don't have that listed from me. Can anybody help me out on that one? It's the Oahu, no, the Oahu amakihi as well.
Oahu and also the Big Island too.
Yeah.
Yeah, Oahu's shown really good resistance there. I used, when I was up in Makiki working, I'd hear them every day at 300 and some odd feet. So they're coming down quite low and to the edge of the forest.
Okay, thanks. And what about Apapani?
Apapani are not considered endangered. So they are, and according to under the IUCN red list of species, they are in the category of least concern. The EV varies, however, because it varies by island. And so from a species perspective, not considered endangered, but they are in very low numbers on a number of islands.
I can't find it off the top of my desktop at the moment, Kavika, but there is a good paper that looks at mortality rates post-malaria exposure for each of the different Hawaiian forest birds. The EV is very high, but there's a lot of them, so they have a little bit more wiggle room in terms of what that means for the population. But for the species that are already in dire population straits, if they have a moderate to high mortality post-exposure, then we would expect population collapse, right? I'll see if I can find the paper and send it your way. But it does include amakihi and apapane, as well as some of the other species that.
And then you mentioned Elapayo. Is there an assumption of resistance for Elapayo, and that's why it wasn't in your? It's also not a honey creeper, right?
Yes, yeah. Although, for example, on Oahu, it is endangered, but it's understood that the main cause of the decline for that species is due to factors like rat predation.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
So take a couple questions, if I can. So this technique with the Wolbachia, does it preclude the future use of any of the other potential techniques, you know, like gene drive and et cetera?
No, it's actually one of the things that both its plus and its minus is that it's completely reversible in that if you stop releasing these trans-infected males, and if there's still the reservoir of the wild males out there, eventually those results would just revert. You would have the mosquitoes back in place. That's a positive for some folks, of course. From the negative perspective, it means you have to keep doing it, albeit presumably at lower levels after you've reduced the population some. But no, I don't think any of those are considered to be mutually exclusive. Can't think of any reason why they would be.
And the last question is really maybe or maybe not to you, but since you're with the ABC, maybe it is. So what's the captive prop status on the, in particular, the 2 Kauai birds and the 2 Maui birds?
Yeah, that I am not qualified to answer that question. I don't know if other folks are here know the status of those. I know that there's been a lot of work in that regard, and I know that some of it's been problematic or challenging, but I'm sure other folks might have better knowledge of that.
I don't have the numbers in front of me, Loyal, so I don't want to hazard a guess on some of them, but we have a relatively large number of akikiki in captivity, but there has been limited breeding of those birds, successful breeding of those birds, successful progeny. For akeke, there is very few in captivity. For kiwiku, there is only 1 in captivity, and it is non-releasable.
Thank you, Michelle.
Yeah, a quick question. Maybe you covered this and I just missed it. In terms of treatment with Wolbachia infested mosquitoes, how frequently does that need to be done, and how large of an area can you potentially treat, and how long is that good for? I mean, can you take an area like Hakalau, or is it just the one piece of Hakalau, or is there any feeling in terms of how large of an area is treatable?
That is a great question. That is well, anyway, it's a great question, and it's one that that we're actively working on figuring out, and that's being driven by 2 things. One, we just need to figure that out in order to get the project on the ground once we have the mosquitoes available to do that. And the other is that part of the environmental assessment process is folks need to figure that out in order to look at what the potential impacts are. So teams from National Park Service, so Haleakala, and other folks with National Park Service, as well as DLNR staff, are actively working at developing potential scenarios for what that would look like, along with our modeler, I think it was our modeler because she's still involved in the project, Catherine McClure, postdoc, who I think is, my understanding, is going to be working with USGS in the near future. Has been working on those models. So looking at how often do you have to release them? If you release them so far apart, what kind of a buffer do you need to have? For example, culex, they travel a lot farther than Aedes mosquitoes. They disperse farther. And so that's both problematic because we can get ingress, but it also means that if you release them and they travel farther, then the impact of your release in an area is likely to be wider. So we're actively working to figure out answers to those very specific questions.
Yeah, and it also may be a pulse thing in terms of when is the most vulnerable time, and trying to focus on that, similar to what some of the predator control is aimed at also.
Yeah, and one of the other challenges is that if we don't have excellent data on the mosquitoes, the distribution and the density of them. And so the Forest Bird projects, along with, of course, Dennis from USGS, are actively working to help fill those knowledge gaps.
There's, as Fern mentioned in the chat, there's definitely logistics issues, very practical on the ground issues as far as the release and deployment of this tool. I have a question in regards to one of the things that was surprising that someone brought to my attention is that when we think about the possible tools available for addressing this long term, for example, gene drive technology, I'm told there's no policy pathway for even getting it approved. So, are there any other things like that, particularly given that you're talking with ESRC, are there any other policy aspects, either at the state or federal level, that as we anticipate the tools we're going to need into the future, we need to be working on the policy pathways ahead of time so we're even able to use those technologies if we decide they're appropriate?
That's a great question. I actually think one of the biggest obstacles to using a technique like gene drive is likely to be the public concern. And so as I referred to in my presentation, we're also faced with the fact that, as you all know, so many people just don't know our birds. And that's why programs like the Symphony of the Birds was such a wonderful thing to help do that. And we need to keep doing that. But yeah, I don't have a great answer for you, but thank you for asking that question. That is what we need to be doing. And we're working to meet with our elected officials to inform them, educate them about this process, just so that they're aware of this tool that is coming out, but also the need for this and other solutions in the future.
Thank you. I would just note that perhaps Denise Antolini's program with embedding the folks, the students from the law school with different portions of DOFA or other agencies to work on particular issues, it might be a really great thing to get one of them, if maybe this is already happening, but in case it's not already happening, get one of them embedded with the Forest Bird program to start anticipating some of those things. Because I do agree, public opinion matters around all of these things, but even if the public were on our side, we can't do it, I'm told, based off of what the policies are today. And so if we identify that as one of the only things that would allow our forest birds to persist into the future, we need to at least have a pathway to getting there and not decide that 10 years from now and then work on the policy pathway. So just would encourage you maybe to look into that. I know she's gone to IUCN right now with the World Conservation Congress, but maybe when everyone gets back, that would be a good thing to pursue.
That's a great suggestion. That program, the legal internship program, is a wonderful one that's been very effective.
So I've had that conversation with a lot of people too. And the thing that has given me a little bit of silver lining here is that the infrastructure that we need in Hawaii in order to actually deploy any of these tools is inherent within the Wolbachia plan. So no matter what we do, the steps that we're taking right now are required in order for us to be able to use any tool post Wolbachia. And I do think that there's a lot of planning, both in terms of infrastructure and in terms of capacity and expertise in Hawaii, that is going to have to grow in order to get any tool out on the landscape. One of the challenges right now is, obviously we need to be able to deploy Wolbachia in multiple different locations roughly at the same time, and having the infrastructure and the personnel in place to be able to do multiple sites at the same time is complicated.
Yeah, thank you, Michelle. When you say that the things are in place, do you also mean that the policy pathways are the same for getting the Wolbachia approval as they would be for Gene Drive approval, or is that the idea I'm told is it's a separate beast that we just need to not forget that that's a separate beast, but is it actually the same?
It's a separate beast and we cannot forget it. I would say that right now, Florida is actually doing a little bit of the Gene Drive work, and we are watching closely what they are doing and how they are doing it to see if there are things that we can learn from pros and cons on how they are approaching it and what Hawaii can take away from that. But you're right, the pathways piece is a different beast. The infrastructure and the capacity within Hawaii to be able to deploy anything is its own challenge, and that is being addressed through Wolbachia.
Great, thank you.
Those are great observations, Michelle, about developing the capacity, because regardless of if it's Gene Drive mosquitoes or Wolbachia mosquitoes, we have to figure out how to get them, how to transport them, how to release them, how to monitor. All those pieces are part of that. I also wanted to mention another aspect of, or another pathway that we're also looking at would be what's called a super transinfection. So it would be infecting our Hawaiian mosquito, creating a line of Hawaiian mosquitoes that's infected with both Wolbachia A, 2 different strains of Wolbachia, and with the idea that that might be able to block transmission of malaria. Wolbachia has been shown to do that in some cases, and that is something that is being looked at Michigan State University. That's the lab that did the original transinfection for us. So people are continuing to think outside just the one narrow approach.
One other comment. I think this is a really great program, and I'm really excited by it, the potential for it. But the other giant mosquito licking in the background is the ones that aren't here yet. And it really gets the whole issue in terms of biosecurity and how crucial that is. And it's sort of like working with biocontrol for plant species or other insects we have in here. If you work at them one at a time, you have 10 more that come in if your biosecurity program is not very good. So it really gets to the point in terms of how critical biosecurity is in preventing the next mosquito that's going to cause the additional problems.
Thanks for that, Jim, as well as all of the inherent public opinion aspects of trying to do biological control as well. That is yet another option that is being looked at, which would be the use of a naturally incompatible mosquito, a Culex that has a naturally incompatible strain of Wolbachia. So in other words, that would be essentially biological control if we were. And there are folks who are looking at that who have found it. Some of that might be possible, haven't succeeded in it yet, but continuing to look at that as an option. The advantage to that is you would not have to go through the apparently would not have to go through the EPA biopesticide registration process. But lots of different things that continue to be explored while also moving forward on this path. And I want to address Fern's problem question of the challenge of the terrain and his concern about, is this, I think basically you're asking, is it doable? This is going to be really hard. And that's really what you were noting as well, Jim, of how big of an area can we cover? There is no doubt that this will be challenging. And as Michelle mentioned, trying to do it all at once. I don't think we'll be able to do it all at once. It will be initiated in stages and phases, and we'll learn. And that's why we have that concern of will it be fast enough for the species that are truly on the brink. But it's the best option we have at present. One of the best options combined with all the other work that's being done.
Yeah, there's a lot of challenges left ahead. Kind of to go back to Melissa's comment about whether this is landscape scale or not. I mean, it's going to be It's not going to be limited scale. It's not going to be everywhere, but it's going to be, if we're going to be effective, it's going to have to occur over a large landscape in a, the forested Mauka areas. Very, very challenging operation. It's going to require multiple applications of large numbers of mosquitoes. So it's definitely, in some ways kind of a stopgap measure, but we're looking at it as our best, chance right now of hanging on to these birds longer. Otherwise, it just looks like some are just going to start blinking out. So how it'll actually look on the ground, we're trying to get the permit right now through DOA for an experimental permit. It's an experimental program. We don't, know that we can affect the change that we're hoping for with this project, but it looks like our best chance right now, and so we're going, all in on it.
Another thing that gives me hope is that in 2019, Chris Farmer and I were able to attend a workshop put on by the Gates Foundation International Workshop, and it brought together experts from around the world who were using this technology for purposes of human health. And Chris gave a presentation about our work. We had several days with the folks, and they were uniformly positive and encouraging. And even though those projects clearly are working at much smaller scales and often in places where you can drive down the road and roll down your window and release the mosquitoes, it's a very different kind of terrain and habitat that they're working with, but still we were encouraged that they were supportive and believed that it was doable. I don't know how many of them have been to Hawaii, but at any rate, that was positive.
Okay, any other questions or comments? Okay, thanks, Taya. Really appreciate it.
Thank you. Thank you for the wonderful discussion. It's really helpful to have questions brought up from folks who are as knowledgeable and have as much expertise as you all do. So mahalo nui.
Yeah, we have no lack of expertise on this with this group regarding forest birds. Many decades assembled. Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you. Aloha.
Okay, next on the agenda is item number 6. This is our last agenda item, and it's the Hawaiian Hoary Bat Priority Research Needs. It's an 11:30 to 1 item. I'm wondering, do people want to do lunch, or we want to just power through? The agenda shows us just powering through to 1 on this. Is that okay with everybody? Just check in.
Okay.
We're good? Okay. Okay, so this is the Hawaiian Hoary Bat Priority Research Needs, and Jim Jacoby is going to lead a discussion about Hawaiian Hoary Bat priorities. This is a really important piece, I think, in understanding and being able to mitigate for and just manage Hawaiian Hoary Bats going forward. So one of the things is, we're trying to do this mitigation work in order to get permits out, and there's very little known about monitoring and mitigating for bats, but also we've learned a lot over the last few years about bats. There's substantially more distribution and abundance than we previously thought when the bat was originally listed, and so continuing this work, understanding the species, understanding its distribution, abundance, and limiting factors is all really important. And there's a lot of important work going forward. So, regardless of, whether we're trying to mitigate for a permit or whether agencies such as, the Fish and Wildlife Service or the Division of Forestry and Wildlife, or any other land management or wildlife management agency or organization wants to help out with management and recovery of Hawaiian bats, this, having a better understanding of bats is going to be crucial to being able to move us forward in terms of bat protection and management. So we'll let Jim take it. Thank you, Jim.
Okay, well, the intention wasn't so much to lead the discussion as much as to sort of kick it off and revive it. We've touched on this issue quite a number of times as we've talked about the various projects that involve Hawaiian hoary bat, and so we had a big effort that was I guess it came to head in 2016 when we did an RFP for bat research as part of mitigation. And as part of that, we put together the BAT task force put together a list of research needs, which then were circulated back to the ESRC and agreed upon as part of that RFP. But the reason we asked to put this item on the agenda today is really to revive that discussion of needs of Hawaiian hoary bats and look at current status, population impacts, potential management and mitigation actions, and so forth to everything from avoid, reduce, or mitigate, take of the species. So I think it's a real key thing. I think all of us realize the limitations we have right now in terms of management actions, knowing limiting factors that actually can be managed, and also to be able to measure some sort of a response to those management actions for the mitigation actions. When we do actions for, say, like plants, like we talked about today with the ecranthes, I mean, we can look at actions and look at regeneration. We can look at longevity of those and so forth. When you talk about seabirds, we can talk about managing areas for predators, particularly, and we can actually measure a response through, successful nesting, fledging, and so forth. But with bats, it's really been a real challenge, and which is led a lot of our discussion on the ESRC to really, increasing the emphasis on the whole part of avoidance and minimization. But this take is still continuing. So really needing to know not only population status, really what are we talking about? What are the threats overall to population viability? And also the options for mitigation, I think, are real key. So we're just really hoping that this discussion we have today at least will kick off a renewed emphasis on really exploring those research needs and seeing if there are ways that we can not only identify key research priorities, but more importantly is how do we kick those into an action status? How can we actually implement them into manageable things? We had the I don't know what the word is, the option to use mitigation for some of the take to be applied to research back as part of that 2016 RFP, and some very successful programs came out of that through various of the projects that were initiated. Many, if not all of those, are either completed or just about to be completed right now. So it's a question of where do we go from here, and have we learned enough? What are the things we still need to know, and how can we actually get these initiated? So that's just sort of the introduction I wanted to give to this discussion, and really throw it open to the committee as a whole in terms of really how can and should we proceed. And I don't know, Koa, whether you can put up on the screen, some of the ideas that have been, tossed around. I mean, the appendix we included in the BAT guidance, or at least the draft of the BAT guidance, is basically from that initial, or from that from that initial RFP that we put together. But then, in our BAT task force discussions, in revisions of the guidance, I mean, there are several things that have sort of floated to the top in terms of some of the real priority kind of research needs. So that's what's showing up on the screen right now. So again, I just wanted to kick off this discussion and trying to see again, get a feel for identifying these research needs. Do we need to do more research, or do we have enough to do it right now? And more importantly is how can we implement them? And I think we're really kind of fortunate. We've got other folks joining in on the discussion. Frank Bonacorso, even though he's retired, he still continues to keep his bat mind working. I see Joel's on the list right here. Let's see who else. Chris is on too. I was hoping that Marcos would be on too. Maybe he'll be here also. But anyway, so I just wanted to start off that way and just get again some thoughts from the ESRC first in terms of what your thoughts are in terms of where we are and where we need to go, and then see if we can continue this discussion. So I'll stop here and throw it open to other folks.
I can start out. I mean, again, for me, it goes back to distribution abundance and limiting factors. So are we happy with our bat monitoring methods right now? I know that this, that West system that they deployed on Oahu, and I think it's being deployed on Maui now as well, is, well, people like that. And so I'm wondering if we're, if it'd be nice to keep that going, A, and B, to some extent on an experimental basis, like, what's the limited, the minimum number of sensors that we consider to be, would give us good data, and because I know there's some questions about, are we just detecting the same bat at 27 different sites, or are we detecting unique bats and all that kind of thing? So getting at that a little more, so we have it helps us out with our abundance estimates. But yeah, having that distribution and abundance across the landscape, certainly at the island level, and then being able to monitor that over time, that seems like a really important thing, whether you call that just ongoing monitoring or research. I don't know.
Well, I think there's two kinds of monitoring, right? There's monitoring at when HCP applicant sites for the presence, and then there's landscape scale monitoring for population estimates. And I think, at least in the terms of our BAT guidance document that we've been working on forever, we have advocated for the use of the sharpest tools possible in a toolbox of tools that range from blunt and dull to a little bit sharper. And I know we've advocated for the use of the sharpest tools possible for applicant sites. But I'm not sure where we landed on if we would want and expect those for landscape scale monitoring. Obviously, the shortcoming of acoustic only is that you're only monitoring for foraging bats. You're not getting roosting habitat. You're not getting transit. You're not getting other things. So it's a subset of presence, and I'm not sure that's the best, but I'm happy to talk it through.
So I would suggest even stepping back from that just a step further and say, when we think about the purpose of monitoring, it needs to be, we need to have, first of all, made predictions before we took action, and we take a set of actions, and then the monitoring tells us whether our predictions played out the way they thought they would. So it's either to say, did things work out the way we thought they were going to? The second purpose of it should be to better understand the system so we make better decisions next time, whether that's as ESRC or whether that's as the state or whatever it might be. And so if we don't have a specific thing the data are feeding back into to help us make better decisions, I think we need to be clear on what that is first. So why are we collecting the data? And then that tells us which tool we need to use, right? Because Kavika, you're right. We either use them for population modeling or we use them for site-specific impacts. And so to know which of those we need to do, we got to know why we're collecting the data.
Right. So we want to know distribution abundance of bats on Oahu. That'd be what you're trying to find out, why you're collecting the data, and then you would design a system that would give you a reasonable estimate of that. Is that?
I think we want that, plus we want to know if that changes over time. Because that's the big question. Is there a cumulative net benefit to these HCP applicants and their plans? So if we don't have a way of knowing if the pat population is going up or down, we're still in the dark.
Right. So you got ongoing monitoring.
Yeah, and that information is also very pertinent to siting of wind farms particularly. And so, I think a clearer picture in terms of where the important areas are and whether those are stable sites or whether those are transient sites is pretty important.
Right. It's a decision-making tool both for permitting and management. And so for, say, DOFA, we have forests are scattered throughout the island. We got some in the Waianae Mountains, both sides of the mountain range. We have them in the Kotolaus, up and down, both sides of the range. If we wanted to do something as an agency for bats, where would we go? What would be the most effective thing to do? Is there somewhere? Then it goes to the, limiting factor thing too. So maybe they're low in a particular area, but that might be because there's limiting factors at play there that aren't at play somewhere else. So I'm just curious, as an agency that protects and manages native species, we'd like to have information that would point us in the right direction in terms of applying limited resources in the most effective way possible.
Go ahead. I was just going to say, just to follow up on that, David, in terms of identifying areas that are important to do something in, I think that's a real key piece. The question is, I think we're still sort of lacking with knowledge in terms of what that do something is, and how that really relates to, a measurable offset of, in a mitigation sense of take. And I think that's one of the real challenges we've got, because that, again, it gets back to that whole question of limiting factors and what is manageable, that if we were able to tweak that then we could get an increase that would be able to be, matched up against take.
I think the tools we're using right now give us occupancy. They don't give population trajectory. And so what I heard Kavika saying, and out of what David said, we're interested in, is there a cumulative net benefit? Are things getting better? If they're getting worse, we're very concerned about that. If they're staying the same, okay, they're staying the same. But really the ESRC and the 195D mandate, are about net benefits, cumulative net benefits. And so if we actually want to see population trajectories and is it getting better, the current tools tell us, is a space occupied or not? Are bats showing up or not? My understanding is they're not giving us population numbers, particularly for just using audio techniques to detect them. Is that correct, Michelle? Sorry, I see your head shaking. Okay, so we're just getting occupancy. Is there something showing up? Is there not something showing up? Okay, so, and I don't know, yeah, it tells you something. If there's more spaces occupied that previously weren't in the past, you can insinuate that basically other spots maybe were full, and so they are dispersing out and occupying new places. But it really doesn't give us good data on population numbers, and to get that we really need a tool that does better at that. So
yeah, right now we're looking at relative abundance. We're not really looking at population numbers. So I don't know if we can get to that or not, if there's a tool for bat monitoring that would give us that or not.
I don't even know if we're at relative abundance. I think we're at occupancy. I think we're just at, is this space, does a bat show up in this spot or not? I don't think we have relative abundance. Go ahead, Michelle.
We're looking at seasonal and annual trends in relative occupancy at an island-wide level, at least for Oahu, not necessarily for the other islands. You can use the number of detections per detection site as an index to track trends to some extent, but that doesn't translate into real numbers of bats or a clean equation into abundance.
Right.
I think that what we're dealing with is we're looking at tools that don't necessarily do exactly what we want them to do. And we know that that's a problem across the country. It's not just unique to Hawaii. I think that there are good people working on trying to find new tools and new ways of using those tools to get better ideas on bat population status and trends across the country, but we simply don't have, and I would actually ask Chris to speak to this, whether or not there's any new tools on the horizon that might be able to get us more refined answers to the questions that we're asking.
Yeah, one question that's right on before Chris jumps in on terms of new things, I just wanted to say is one thing that's right on the table right now is the fact that the West project is in the last stages of wrapping up the field work and starting to pull out the sensors across that. Is there a need to continue that type of monitoring before all the sensors are pulled out? If we could find some sort of a way of continuing that on, is that useful information to continue on for another season or two, or even in some sort of an abbreviated sampling design such as Joel has suggested? So this is a real question right now in terms of go or no in terms of whether he ends up pulling out all of his sensors.
I think that information is incredibly valuable, and having Oahu is the only island where we have that landscape level approach, the island-wide approach of getting the information. Is the tool blunt? Yes. Does the information have limitations? Yes, of course it does. But it is the very best that we've got, and I think that there is a lot of value to it. In terms of whether or not we can continue it, I think that's a funding question, right? And it is a funding question that, to be honest, is probably not an HCP question.
Mm-hmm, right. Yeah, it's a combination of funding and also potential. Is the design? Are there design tweaks that would make it more useful or more effective or better for what we're trying to get the information? Maybe this would be a good segue into Chris. I mean, if you got some thoughts in terms of other tools and so forth, and then maybe, Joe, you can jump back in again, and Frank too.
I just wanted to say that I'm not familiar with any new tools that would get at estimating population sizes.
Yeah, I was hoping Marcos is going to be on the line here too. Maybe I'll send him a message. I'm not sure if he's in the field or what, but because he's been looking at ways of trying to use the kind of information collected at points, the occupancy type of information, but to be able to use that to actually do some population estimates in terms of some of the analyses that he's been working with. So anyway, that's something at least we can think about and look at. I know he and Joel have been talking about that a little bit. Joel, do you have any thoughts on that?
Yeah, we've talked a little bit about that, and potentially if there was some continuation, doing some pairing of thermals with our detectors to see if one of the issues we have is whether or not bats are actually there and not calling at certain times of the year when we see what appears to be a lack of bats in certain areas of the island. So that's one thing we've talked about, in terms of getting at numbers. I know he's, been working on that. We've started in looking at utilization of timestamps on the acoustic detectors in another project to look at the feasibility of, looking at minimum numbers given time periods when you're getting bats in different regions. So they're independent bats. At a minimum. So, there's thoughts going into those things, and I think they could be applicable even looking backwards if you could find a tool that made use of the data on hand. So there's a few different things going on in that respect, but nothing definitive at this point.
I think the questions in terms of where they are and getting at the question of abundance, I think is one thing which is really important. But again, it sort of begs the question then is what do we do in those kinds of areas? I mean, one application, like I mentioned earlier, was that potentially could influence siting areas for wind farms, better or worse areas to do that. But again, it still begs the question in terms of mitigation management. What would you do in an area that where you knew that you had more or less that you could do a management that would increase the bat population in a measurable way? So again, I think we're talking two different kinds of information. One which is more in terms of presence, abundance, and how that really relates to population impacts as a whole. But when it gets down to actual management, mitigation management, I think that gets into a different level of challenge.
Jim, I think
Right.
the audio detections and the presence absence kind of occupancy modeling can be useful for citing the wind farms. Are they there? Are they not there before you start? Are they there? Are they not there afterward? The thermal imaging allows you to actually count individuals per an area of, wherever it's the sensor can detect. And so you can start getting at more specific numbers, densities, relative abundance, that kind of stuff. So, again, I think my blood pressure starts rising when we say we don't have tools. We have tools, but they cost more. They take more work to analyze. We have mark recapture methods we can use that are the classic way of getting at population numbers. It's just really hard for bats to capture them. All the easy species were studied a long time ago. These are the hard ones. And so again, it's not that there aren't tools, it's that we haven't invested the amount of funds that it would take to get at these numbers. I think it's just really important to say. It's not that we're waiting for something to be invented. We just don't have the funds to do the existing tools with the money that's been provided. They're also not things that are easy to just show up, set something up, go away for 8 months and come back and recollect, And so they take long-term investment of time being on island to do things like a marker capture study. So they're just different approaches.
One other thing that comes to mind thinking about Jim's discussion of utility of work is, I get asked several times a year since we've started this project about trends or local presence of bats as people are looking at those, management actions in a given area. The other thing, several times this year we've been invited to different discussions about mitigation opportunities and, having something to compare those mitigation actions to at a broader scale seems like another particularly useful utility of the data because, in a given area, you might see increases in activity rates at a monitoring site, but if you're seeing those same levels of increases across the island, then is the mitigation really that successful? So, that's a tool that I've been asked about several times over the past year as well, just as another use of the data, I guess.
Yeah, and then to the notion that the data we have for Oahu that Wes provided shows us where's a good place to put a windmill or not, or wind turbine. I would say all that study does is show us where the really bad places to put them are. It doesn't, if there are no detections in some places, it doesn't mean there's not transiting bats. So to be sure everybody doesn't think that, oh, these areas are open for development.
And there's also been studies, I think, that show that there's a potential for wind farms to actually attract bats. So even if you have an area with low, you may get them anyway. And obviously it would be really great to have an actual population estimate by island. That would be one of the top things to get. Mm-hmm. That may take a few years, if ever. But I do find it hard to deal with the HCPs when we don't know that we can actually do something that increases bats even locally. So that's something, if we could figure that out, or at least see whether or not some of the past restoration projects that are now in their 20, 30, 40, 50th year of operation, what level of activity you're seeing in those areas versus similarly sited places that did not undergo the restoration, whether there was any difference there. It's not going to be a for sure cause and effect, but it may give you at least an idea as to whether or not areas that are undergo restoration in the name of bat recovery, whether or not those areas are even potentially going to be used.
In discussions with Marcos, Frank, and Dave and Joel and others, it seems like one of the real challenges we have is really identifying limiting factors and manageable limiting factors. Things such as demographic studies and so forth are really, really challenging. Mark recapture is really challenging. Melissa's right. We do have the tools that we just don't have the real ability to apply them in enough of a way, I think, quickly to get that kind of information, at least at the capacity we're working with right now. So it really, shifts a little bit more of the emphasis on the avoidance and minimization part of it, and the recent work with deterrence and so forth, I think is really exciting. How effective are they? Is that really the direction we should go in? Even if we could come up with really effective deterrence, we're still going to have some level of take, and so we still have to get back to the mitigation. I think with the mitigation actions we've been doing so far, I think we can do a reasonable job if we were actually monitoring it, of looking at net benefit for other species than Hawaiian hoary bats, and certainly in terms of other habitats that are managed and so forth. There may be benefits to birds and plants and things like that, but again, the tie-in with bats has been a real challenge. And so, should we put much more emphasis in terms of, really looking at the effectiveness of these deterrents, and how that might work, or other strategies for minimizing take, as a whole.
Yeah, I think minimizing take is certainly ideal. It doesn't get us to a better understanding of how to achieve cumulative net benefit, though. So don't put all their eggs in that basket.
Yep. True.
Yeah, I agree. I think diversifying is a good strategy. So, putting some efforts into deterrence, minimization, but also I think research geared towards advancing mitigation, using radio telemetry to supplement, some of the work that Wes is doing to identify, we know areas that are, show high occupancy, but how are bats actually using those areas, and trying to identify, areas that are good for mitigation as well. So identifying areas maybe that are bad for turbines, but also areas that are good for mitigation. And then also taking steps to learn, like Will said, about, there's examples from mitigation in the past. So Kikinui is a good example of an opportunity to learn from mitigation efforts. And I think trying to look at mitigation in kind of a smaller scale as research projects, and kind of building upon, the steps of mitigation. So what happens when you remove exotic, invasive vegetation? If you clear the understory of invasive vegetation, what happens to the arthropod community? And you start to see, revegetation of native species. How long do you see a return to, increase in arthropod communities? How does this relate to bats? What are the steps, and how can we start learning more about the success of mitigation efforts? And I know that kind of ties back into, what's the measure? But if we're using relative measures now, using occupancy and relative activity rates, at least it's something. But it can, I think, help gear towards how do we start mitigating for bats? Is anything that we're doing working or appears to be working in terms of mitigation?
So Chris, everything you just said seems to be predicated on the assumption that food is a limiting factor to bat populations. Do you have any data to indicate that?
That was just an example. It was just an example of, kind of the steps that someone, you might take. But I don't know.
Yeah, I think, well, we're still trying to hone in on what is the limiting factor. Is it foraging habitat? Is it roosting habitat? So that's a big one. Another thing, we've been focused a lot on Oahu with this occupancy study. We don't have occupancy studies for any of the other islands, and Big Island in particular, there is a wind farm that doesn't even have a HCP because they're claiming there's no bats. So it would be good to know if there are bats present in Hawaii and other areas like that.
Yeah, we know that there are, and there has been good data from that area that shows that bats are present. But you're right, there is no island-wide study like Wes has on Oahu.
Or Maui either, right?
Somebody else than me answered this. We have it for the like a third of Maui, correct?
Yeah.
But not all of Maui.
Part of East Maui, right? Well, I'm going to push a little bit on the occupancy type of data, and again, I'm going to play devil's advocate a little bit on this. Is the fact that in terms of trying to use this kind of information in terms of citing, wind farms, we're already way behind the game on that one, because many of the projects have already in the process, and they've already identified sites and so forth, and so the utility of that for that purpose is I think limited. It certainly has some applicability potentially for future ones, but I've got concerns in terms of several new projects seem to be getting potentially online or ready to be announced and come to the ESRC table, and without that kind of information anyway. So the question is okay, how can we actually use that kind of information? And I'm not saying it's not useful. I just want to throw that on the table just to see whether this is something where we should put a lot of emphasis on. And I see Marcos is on the line, and if you want to jump in, and Karina's on the line too, and I know Frank is there, and so we got besides Joel, we got some really good expertise here. And Chris too, obviously.
Yeah. Thanks for inviting me. Sorry, I arrived a little late to the meeting. I just wanted to talk a little bit about a couple of points that were raised. One, Kadika, we actually do have a 5-year study of bat occupancy for the Big Island. So that does exist, and it does show that bats are up in the Hawaii area and everywhere we've actually looked. The occupancy levels differ, but that study has been done. It certainly wasn't done to the rigor that had been done or is being done on Oahu. There's been a lot learned about the methodology, and it could certainly be improved on. And the other comment I want to make is I think Melissa has raised this a few times about population size estimates, and I think Wiles also raised this. And at the March 2020 presentation we gave, we actually did present to the ESRC this idea of using random encounter models to get at population estimates. And it's, as I described back in that talk, it uses what Melissa pointed out, thermal videography to identify the number of bat detections that you're seeing within fields of view, and incorporating information on bat activity throughout a night, as well as flight speeds to get at density estimates. And these estimates are similar, although the models differ, to VCP models for getting at point estimates of bird density that in many studies have been used to, you do this across many locations, you map out the extent of habitat, and you can extrapolate these densities to known area sizes and get at ballpark estimates of population size. So the methods do exist. Now this encounter rate modeling technique has not been verified for bats. And that's kind of the biggest hurdle to using it. I've done some back of the envelope calculations using some input values, and it generates numbers that I think are reasonable, but we don't know what truth is. And I think that's the biggest hurdle to applying this particular model to any thermal videography samples or any other kind of samples. But the method is there, and it would need to be validated. We tossed out the idea of actually doing this by incorporating radar into essentially validating it with radar, where you're sampling a much larger area, you're tracking the number of bats in the area, and you're seeing how that matches with what you're seeing with thermal video. But the radar validation step is going to be tricky and a little bit time consuming to do. But if it could be demonstrated, then you could take this technique and then start sampling different areas, like areas that are just like open pasture or closed forest, and looking at bat encounter rates, getting your density estimates, and seeing if these things relate to other metrics like insect abundance counts or insect diversity in these different areas, and start looking at how does changes in land cover type relate to bat numbers, and just in turn gets at foraging habitat quality or even roost habitat use. So the methods are there. but it's a big lift right now.
Marcos, thank you for correcting my misunderstanding about the occupancy models for Hawaii Island. I had a question, tangential but relevant. I was talking earlier about there not being, that just shows us the stuff we have, at least for Oahu, just shows us where bats are foraging because they're only using acoustic. Do we have any knowledge about foraging patterns in relation to roosting habitat? Do they go in concentric circles until they find something, or do they fly straight to someplace they know there's food? Do we have any knowledge about that?
Well, we have a lot of thermal video work happening now of bat behavior at the roost habitat. It's telling us a lot about number of pups and the occurrence of rats in various habitats as potential predators, activity budgets, and so on. But at the kind of the larger scale, like how do bats move in and around their the roost habitat, or which is really just kind of intermixed with foraging habitat. They're not really distinct habitats per se. We don't really have that information in terms of kind of individual bat scale movements in a home range and in different types of habitats.
Okay, thank you.
Well, we do have some information on that. From the telemetry work that was done in 2005, there are distinct foraging areas that bats are using, and generally they will have a number of areas that they can visit over a period of time. I think there's a part of investigation as well as they have known sites that they're going to revisit over a period of days, and they will get on these foraging bouts where they will work an area for anywhere up to 2 hours, just working it back and forth foraging. And then, sometimes you might have a second foraging in the evening. And so there's definitely some data on how their, foraging behaviors.
Yeah, I stand corrected. There has been telemetry work, and some of this is actually being analyzed now. It just hasn't been released beyond the Bonacarso et al. Paper from some years ago. And there are some limitations in the data in terms of like how long bats were tagged or tracked through a night, for example, how long the tags last. And you're right, Chris, that there is information on some movement, but it's hard to distinguish. It's hard to take this information and say, okay, this applies to foraging habitat as distinct from roosting habitat, which is what Kavik had asked about. And I was trying to make the point that these habits are really just kind of intermixed largely, although they do have areas they go forage and the areas they do use for roosting. They're not necessarily highly distinct. And they can forage right around the areas that they roost in as well.
Yeah. And energetically, it's beneficial for them to roost close to their foraging site. And so, Kavika, when you talk about, is there evidence of, diet being a limiting factor? If they're not going to forage in an area if there isn't a food resource there, so they're going to leave. And so, likely, if they are staying close to a foraging site, which there are papers that show that, especially during reproductive periods, females will stay really close to their roost sites to forage. They would be somewhere else. Also, the work that we did in Kahiki Nui, so we were able to study for a short period of time prior to the ungulate removal, after the ungulate, and so during that period we had high rates of activity, and after all the ungulates were removed from that area, those activity levels dropped, and they never went back up to that level of when we first recorded them during that first period. And so we do suggest that it could be attributed to the ungulates being removed and potential decrease in insect abundance or availability.
Frank, do you want to jump in on this discussion about this topic or anything related to it?
Yes, I haven't figured out how to raise my hand. I've been waving my hand in the video, but having it right now. So I add one point to what Chris was talking about Kahiki. So Kahiki Nui was monitored with, I think, 14. Can you hear me?
No, you're coming off and on. I wonder if you
Are you hearing me?
No, cut off your video and see if that might help it. The bandwidth seems a little bit limited.
Okay. Is it better now?
We can hear you.
No?
Yeah, I can hear you. Yeah, we can hear you now.
Try talk.
You can hear me. Okay.
Yes. I meant just turn off your camera.
Okay. Chris's point about Keiki Nui. So hit stop video.
Frank, you're yeah.
Now better?
Completely. That might help a bit because you're coming in and out.
Am I
Go ahead.
Yeah, I've stopped the video. Okay. The Kahiki Nui study, which is a published HCSU technical report, was monitoring at, I believe it was 14 point detectors along an elevational gradient from July 2012 through 2014. And Chris mentioned that there was a decline in the last season, actually after ungulates were removed. And I wonder if people are aware that there are a number of studies that show that ungulates, through the scavenging insects of their droppings, as well as the biting insects that are around them, actually in some places have been shown to support bat communities. But the hope is that over a long period of time, as the native vegetation builds up again, that will make up for that possible decline in insect population that was influencing bats there. So this is nearly 10 years since that 3-year study was done. It's a mitigation site that was set up with funding from bat funds. I would propose that it would be a site that's ripe for going back and recreating that study to see what changes in detectability. Has there been an improvement? I would also suggest, well, first of all, I'd like to thank the people who put the white paper together. I think there was a great deal of effort in gleaning really good information, putting it together. I like the population vortex models, and I do have some ideas about things that could be done to get at age structure and lifespan, and that's would provide data that would improve future iterations of the vortex model. So those are a couple of things that I see as being ripe and fairly easy. Monitoring a mitigation site that was monitored a decade ago, again, and also improving our understanding quite easily through some new tools, DNA analysis tools. Both there are a couple different techniques. Aging can be done through telomere length study, which Emma Teeling in Ireland has pioneered, and several of her students. And there's also a fairly new DNA methylation process in which methylation of the DNA increases with age. And there's a very nice verification study on a bat in Europe, which is a Vespertilianid foliage bat, which had a large population of banded individuals of known age that could be looked at to verify this methylation process. And the verification was very strong. So I'll stop there for a second.
Oh, thanks for that input, Frank. That's really good. I just want to throw out, we've talked several times here in the last few minutes about, insect populations and so forth. Is it, I'll throw a question out to the group, is it reasonable to potentially use arthropod populations, at least subsets of them, especially the beetles and the moths, as a proxy measure for productivity of bats in an area. Is if we do management there that leads to the increase of those groups particularly, can we use that as a measure that potentially we could have an increase in bat productivity, or do we need to get to the actual bats, which is a bigger leap, quite honestly.
So Jim, the question specifically is, has the research been done on productivity of the bats linked to availability of insects in the environment? And it seems like there's been very few studies done on reproductive success that actually tracked reproductive success, number of pups successfully reared and recruited into the future population. I think I saw Chris unmuted. I also want to notice I see Karina's hand raised.
Okay, well, why don't we go to Karina first, and then we'll come back to you, Chris.
Hi, can everyone hear me okay?
Yep.
Yeah, okay. I've been listening, so there's a lot of good stuff going on here. I guess I had thoughts on a few things. I think that, doing the projects that we've been doing now, the boots on the ground sort of stuff, although it is, more expensive and time consuming, I think it's giving us a lot of good information, and it is really necessary in a lot of these places to track bats and find roosts and collect guano and look at insects. Like all this stuff is, really good research, and I think it should be expanded to other islands like Oahu, because I really do think you have to connect to the bat. Like, I guess there's a lot of great technology for counting and all that stuff too, but I still see it as not connecting to the health of the population necessarily, right? It's okay, we've got numbers and they're increasing or decreasing, but we don't know, the other things going on with the bats, how the breeding is going, if there's issues with health like foraging or pesticides or any other things that could be affecting them, like predation. We really still are at a loss on all that information. And then I just wanted to put in about, in support of those things Frank mentioned about, looking at age structure is something we can do with genetics too. And we have lots of samples to use. We have all this information from carcasses and other things that could really add to the research value too. I think age would be important for a lot of the modeling. And, if we can start putting ages on bats, we can look at lifespan, and then that will help with population modeling. And then about Kahiki Nui, I was curious to know if West picked up any of those old sites when they were doing their leeward Haleakala monitoring.
We were sampling no, I think we did not specifically sample any of those sites. We were pretty close in proximity, but I don't think any of them were duplicates. Some of the work Hawaii is doing in their mitigation efforts over there, I think, are much more overlapping.
Okay, so data is being collected there, acoustic data?
I can't say for sure because I'm not doing it. And I have to look back to see, but somebody like George could provide that information.
Okay, yeah, I was just curious if places like Nakula, had been monitored and things like that. But yeah, I guess I assumed that maybe some of that was being picked up again in that study. Okay, I'll stop talking for now. But yeah, I'm really enjoying this conversation, and yeah, thanks.
Okay, Chris, you want to jump back in?
Yeah, well, I mean, Melissa made a good point right before I was about to speak. So it kind of, I was basically going to say that, yeah, there are some studies that have shown, activity patterns and activity patterns of bats and occupancy is linked, somewhat linked to insect abundance. But, she made a good point when you think about, reproductive success, that doesn't exist. So I think that using, insects as a proxy wouldn't be appropriate.
Just by itself. Yeah. Okay, now I just want to throw that question out there. I mean, it is something which is monitorable at a site, and you can see the seasonal variation in that, but it's making that thread connection between that and a bat productivity is the key part. And the other challenge too is obviously, as we know, I mean, it's a big open population, at least on an island-wide basis, in terms of how bats are moving around, both seasonally and even daily. And so it's a question in terms of where does your management need to be focused, and where and when, I guess, is what it is too. So I think that again, it's a very different kind of situation than we have with, for example, seabird, upland seabird nesting areas and so forth, in terms of how to manage those.
Yeah, I really like the long-term mitigation projects, the idea of the long-term mitigation projects that were proposed in the white papers, and working towards those, trying to figure out. I think it does come back to, again, this how are we determining the level of success in terms of increasing the bat's population, but still understanding how different actions are corresponding to activity rates, and you can supplement that with thermal studies, thermal imaging studies, or depending on where it is, potentially radiotelemetry, things like that, as you start to implement some of these mitigation things. But I do think it's something that we need to at least start to learn more about and learn from, especially Kahiki Nui, and just in that two-year period of doing that, the monitoring there after the removal of ungulates. I mean, there was just tons of regeneration of koa. It was amazing, and so it would be really interesting to see what's going on with the the forest there, what's going on with the insect community, and what are we seeing in terms of bat activity? How does bat activity relate to those baseline studies that we did a while back?
Yeah. Yeah, no, I think it's, I'll sort of two sites that have sort of come up, consistently in terms of trying to look at long-term response to the at least the forest regeneration models, that we've talked about for mitigation, are Kahiki Nui and then also Hakalau. I know Marcos presented at our last bat workshop, March a year or so ago, in terms of potential for looking at different areas and different stages of regeneration across the upper part of Hakalau, and similar things in terms of looking at that. And this is something that several of us have talked about, both in the bat task force as well as in the ESRC meetings, as far as trying to look at so what's happening with bat populations in these areas and their food resources. How is that changing as time goes on? But these are long-term studies for sure. Although they can be shortened to some degree if you have a good side-by-side, kind of a model such as, up at Hakalau, where you've got different stages of regeneration. That seems to, taking off my sort of facilitation role in this discussion here, that seems like a real high priority thing, to me, in terms of, seeing whether we can detect any kind of differences there relative to bat use of the area, if nothing else. We can't tie it directly into productivity, which is, Melissa's go-to stone. There's no question about that. That's a key part of it. But how do we get there? So is that an important thing that we should really put to a high priority? And if so, how could we get those types of studies conducted, be it short term or the long term? And where does the funding come from? Who's going to be doing that kind of work? And are we going to just keep talking about it?
Well, so I've been toying with this too. I mean, I look at a lot of these things and I wonder, okay, a 20-year project, how are you going to fund that? But, there was this idea of this mitigation bank. I think that's what my understanding was that Kahiki Nui was this mitigation bank. And so I wonder, is it possible to have, a portfolio of mitigation actions, so mitigation studies, that build on each other, and they adapt based on, what a previous study has shown. So, if HCP applicants are looking to do, mitigation, are they able to tie in and pick up one of these research projects? Is that something that could be possible? I mean, that's the only way that I could see, potentially funding something like this, a long-term 20-year project, 20-year study is, having having things that are available and having people buy into it over time.
I'll invite both Dave and Michelle to sort of jump in on that from both the state and Fish and Wildlife perspective in terms of, is that feasible? I mean, it's certainly a thing that, Dave, you've talked about quite a bit in terms of having, really an island-wide perspective and an island-wide type of management strategy.
Yeah, I'm a big proponent of having some sort of mitigation banking program. I think that'd be a great way to go, especially for things like bats where there's so much uncertainty. Unfortunately, we're not authorized by law right now to run a mitigation bank. And so Linda Chow over the AG's office has suggested we go back and amend our legislation to allow us to do that. They have marine mitigation banks currently authorized. And so he took a stab at it last session, but the bill didn't go anywhere. And it would be great, if we could try to keep pushing on that and get authorization. Because I think, right now we're doing these, we don't really know what we're doing. We're trying our best and hoping with adaptive management we can do it. But if we could get mitigation banks where we already have credits accumulated, that would provide a lot more certainty in the process, I think.
Well, not necessarily just not like the full concept of I wasn't really getting into like the details of like the mitigation, but like the idea of it. So there's a portfolio of research initiatives, these mitigation research initiatives that are available. And, if an HCP applicant needs to, do mitigation, they can go to this portfolio and they can take one of these things and develop it into a mitigation research plan that gets approved. And then, they do it. So it's not necessarily, okay, we need to do mitigation. We're giving you, $100,000 and then you're going and doing this. Yeah, but still it's just like the idea that we have a longer term focus that's broken up into small bits that allows people to grab and run and do those things. And they're being, it's approved. It's being, managed and overseen, and it's also adapting based on results from the previous, projects and mitigation efforts.
In some ways, that's how that RFP in 2016 was designed and actually ran, and that was really quite successful. And it was really nice because it wasn't just simply here's a list of projects and you can just pick which one you want to do and then you sort of develop it yourself. It actually funneled back through the ESRC in terms of project reviews and things like that. And I thought that was really productive. The challenge now is that it was deemed that the mitigation funds could be put to that. And that's less of an option right now, which is why Michelle is going to jump in and tell us really the latest status on where the Fish and Wildlife stands with that and whether that's even a possibility to go again. Because again, if we can't find a way to fuel these kinds of studies, we're just continue to kick the can down the road with really productive discussions, but not going anywhere.
Thanks.
Give us the answer. Give us the answer.
So there's a bunch of different pieces of this, right? So in terms of mitigation banks, the Fish and Wildlife Service is very supportive of mitigation banks. I would love to see mitigation banks work in Hawaii. And I've talked to a lot of folks that are interested in developing them. And actually there's been sort of a large cadre of folks that have been interested in Hawaiian Hoary, developing a mitigation bank for Hawaiian Hoary bats in the islands, people that have been really successful at doing mitigation banks for bat species on the mainland. And so I know that there's interest out there in doing it. It just hasn't come to fruition yet. And I do think it's a hard sell coming out here with land prices the way they are. You have to actually achieve the conservation benefit before you can sell credits. It's a big ask of people. And so I'd like to say that that's going to happen at some point. In terms of a mitigation pot for that would then fund and fuel research priorities, that's not a traditional mitigation bank, and that's sort of a different question than a mitigation bank. We might want to come up with a new word for that just so that there's not confusion. In general, I mean, certainly I'm not opposed to something like that. It would be great to see something that has a vested interest in trying to move this forward so that we're not caught off guard with future HCP requests, and so that we do have better information by which we can make agency decision-making and support ESRC decision-making related to HCPs. There's just not an easy way of requiring that. So I think this is worth a little bit more brainstorming. Certainly, we've learned a lot over the last couple of years, and as new HCPs come in the door, we would be expecting them to learn from what has already been done and then to tier off of that. It is very hard in Fish and Wildlife Service to convince people to authorize mitigation in the form of research. And the reason why is that the money that is going to the research is not equating to new bats, for lack of a better word. Now, I know how important research is, and I am happy to push the issue and do our best to try and get research more as part of counted towards mitigation. But ultimately, I think that it's probably going to be more likely that we push new HCPs to do their due diligence on the front end and to do research as part of their HCP and in their own best interest, because otherwise it's going to be really hard for us to authorize ongoing take.
I think you make a really good point there, Michelle. The only thing I would say is the fact that we haven't been able to really show that the mitigation actions we've been doing so far in terms of forest restoration have had a direct link to productivity of bats either.
Yeah.
And research would be a way of trying to tie that up so that we can actually make those kinds of statements in terms of the management that's being done. And so we sort of have sort of a false thing that's sort of floating out there thinking that it's real, but it's just a balloon that doesn't have much more than air in it right now.
Yeah. And I think that it's probably worth ESRC spending a little bit of time thinking about, right now we're pretty quiet on the wind front, but there's going to come a time where we're going to expect to probably see more wind farms come online, and they're going to need HCPs, and they're going to be coming to us again. And we're going to need to be ready with clear guidance about what we expect out of a draft HCP before it gets to us. And us spending a little bit of time now thinking about what that might look like will help facilitate that process in the future.
Yeah. I think that's part of the intention with the guidance document in the first place. But I just want to see if there are any other thoughts, Lisa or Gordon, any thoughts in terms of, where we are in this discussion and how we keep it going, or how do we make it live?
No, I think, we've had these workshops periodically. We had a workshop, I think the last one was a few days right before, a week or so before we had the first big COVID shutdown.
Can you speak up a little, Gordon? We can barely hear you.
Yeah. How's that?
Oh, much better.
Yeah. Okay. Sorry about that. No, I'm just pointing out that, we've had several bat workshops over the years and they've been really good. And the last one we had was shortly before, I think it was back in February or March of 2020, before COVID got really bad and shut us down. I think that should continue. There's a lot of ideas on the table. I'm not gonna try and weigh in on them right now. So those are my thoughts.
For me, I think I had been hopeful that some of the combination of more imagery, the radar detection in combination with detectors would help us get more closely to some estimates on numbers or closer to reality of what's happening. Because I am fearful that if we don't get some level of kind of, whether it's occupancy or presence absence, that as new projects come online, they really are able to move ahead without, you know, and then they go through an HCP process and 4 or 5 years, a decade goes by, and they've been taking bats the whole time. And we haven't been able to put things into play. So I'm also an advocate for getting as much kind of, you know, broad general understanding that's comparable across the islands as well, or similar projects being done on each of the islands, so that as projects move ahead, we have, you know, common baselines available.
I see Chris has his hand up, and then I have a comment when he's done.
Yeah, I just wanted to just kind of go back to what Michelle was saying. And you know, the use of research and mitigation. I want to be able to do mitigation, and at the end of the mitigation, I want to be able to learn something from it to apply in the future. And so I see it as hand in hand, but there's a benefit to the mitigation. There's a net benefit. I just think it needs to be done in a way that we're learning something from it, and so that involves the research aspect. So I don't really want to say research, but I do want to, it needs to be in there. The problem I see is, you know, moving forward with a, you know, some mitigation things. It's, you know, when your focus is net benefit, creating 5 bats or 6 bats, and proving that you've created these bats. You know, to me, it's you know, you might lose the other aspect of it, which is learning from it. And so I do see the importance in the regulation, but it also, you know, being able to learn and apply this information, because necessarily, you know, I feel like that's important in the long run to apply this information. If we learn something, we know that this is beneficial, and you know, in terms of, you know, we see increased activity patterns, or, you know, we're able to use thermal imaging. We're able to see that, you know, bats are, you know, using an area, foraging that they were not, you know, and what we have done, and we're able to apply that, then we can do that in the future. So I just see them going hand in hand, and I just want to, I guess, just make that point when I talk about mitigation and research. I just want to be able to do it in a context where I'm learning from this mitigation.
Yeah, and I really appreciate that, Chris. I think that the way that you just worded it is basically how I've been able to get it approved on the Fish and Wildlife Service side thus far, and that will continue to be our strategy moving forward.
Yeah, so this is, so building on what both Chris and Jim and Michelle have said, but bringing it back, you know, it is on the applicant to show that they have provided a net benefit through their mitigation project. So let's say, just as an example, that their mitigation project is to restore some habitat. We would expect that they are using, how it feeds back into our conversation today is, we would expect they're using monitoring methods that actually show they provided a net benefit. So that net benefit is not in acres planted or miles of fence built or plants outplanted. That net benefit is in terms of, did you actually make up for the number that were killed? And so in that case, we would expect, based on the research that was paid for out of mitigation funds over the last number of years, that that might be thermal imaging, where you can get at actual numbers that would, you know, an increase in the number of detected individuals per time or per space, and or, you know, potentially increased detections of reproductive success at the site. So that's where I think that's where your learning comes in, is you say, hey, if I do X, I will get Y, and then you collect data to say, did that actually happen? And that's where that learning that Chris is talking about comes in. So it doesn't have to be, that's the way adaptive management in its purest form is supposed to work, right? You make a prediction, you collect the data, you take action, and you say, did it actually do what we predicted it would do before we took action?
Okay, Cole, I don't know. You've been monitoring the YouTube channel. Is there any way that people could send comments in there, or are there any comments or anything that come in from that we need to bring in the discussion quickly here?
We've got the chat going, but we haven't received any comments yet, so we're good.
Okay, that's good. I just want to make sure there was the opportunity for that. We just have about 20 minutes or so before we're scheduled to end, and I don't want to really go too long. I'm getting hungry too. I'm sure all of you are. Again, I'm going to continue to be a bit of a gadfly on this in terms of really trying to push it. Is again, I think we've had a very good discussion today. I know this was not a decision item on the agenda by any means. And so it's not a question of a vote or anything like that. It's really more of a discussion point. But I'm going to throw it out to the group is how do we get from these great discussions to more action? We pushed it really hard back in 2000. I think it's 14, 15 that led to the 2016 RFP, and that was great. And I think we got some really, really good information, great projects and good information that have come out of that effort. And we got a good outline of research needs that we can build upon. But how do we make that next step forward? Again, to get away from just simply talking about it. And if we can't, we need to figure out how to continue this discussion at future meetings so that we can and put it on as a decision item in terms of how can we actually go from here to there? How do we get some capacity to be able to get the information we really need to have? And so I just want to see whether again I'll be very frustrated if this is all we do is talk about it.
Jim, I'm noting we've got 3 or 4 hands raised. Karina and Frank, I think, have been up the longest, and then David, and then Chris.
Thank you for watching that, Melissa. I apologize because I'm sort of blind to that. I'm sort of looking at the screen and everybody here, and I'm not seeing the hands up. It's easier if you go like this. So who should go first? Let's just go in order here. Frank, you want to jump in? Again, we don't have much time, so let's keep it brief. But you got to unmute yourself.
Okay, thank you. I just want to make a point following up on Michelle's statement. It's really great that there is in writing a legal requirement to show a benefit after an HCP for through some mitigation effort or monitoring or research. But I think the white paper states that so far nobody's been able to do that. Is that really realistic to expect that because you expect it, that it's gonna happen?
Yeah, good point.
I mean, that's the law, though. That's what's written in 195D.
Right. See, Karina?
Hi, I was just gonna say that there are some projects that might, smaller type of projects that could be more priority to get at some of the remaining questions that we have with existing data sets that we have. So I think that there's still progress that can be made on this smaller front with some of the research projects. And I'd also just like to add that we've gotten really good at catching bats. So I'm not worried that if future research was to involve catching bats and getting information about bats, we've got it down. So yeah, thanks.
Great. And Chris?
So I just wanted to comment. I mean, I think, moving forward, I think it's, how do we accomplish these things? I mean, I think it's going to require, conversations. I think it's going to require, sitting down, identifying, okay, can we do this right now? Do we have the means to do this? Okay, no. Can we do this? Okay. Yeah, we could do it. We don't have the money. How do we get the money? And sitting down and coming up with ideas. What are we able to do? What are our options? And just kind of working through that. And I think it's important, the legal aspect of it. And, what can we do in terms of, using the resources that we have available to, push some of these things forward. And, that meet the legal requirements. Or change the legal requirements. No, yeah, so that's what I think, moving forward, is how we have to do it, I think it's just going to require, continued conversation. And, maybe a subgroup that, kind of working together to kind of move this forward, to figure out how to do this.
Yeah.
The other thing I just wanted to mention real quick was, in terms of research priorities that I felt was pesticides and metal contamination. So I think, that's important. That is something that could be done. That is something that's, is achievable. And I think it's something that's important. I think it's something we need to know about. It's been shown to affect populations, in other species. Population declines in other species. It's also shown to have, physiological effects, and can, affect reproduction and things like that in females. And so I think it's something that we need to have a look at, and at least know, is it a threat? Is it a contributing threat to populations in addition to what we're seeing? So I just wanted to make that noted, that I think pesticides and metal contamination is an important research.
Yeah, that was something that was identified earlier on, and we actually did have one proposal that came out in that RFP, but that one wasn't funded. Dave, I wanted to sort of toss a question back to you. Is right now we do have, the BAT task force has been working on a revision to the BAT guidance document, based upon input from many different sources, including the workshop we had a year plus ago. And part of that guidance document, we do have a discussion of research needs and so forth, and also have an appendix that includes the 2016 sort of framework, research framework. I'm just wondering, and I realize we're still, working our way through in terms of finalizing that guidance document, but would it be worthwhile to pull the research part of that out of there, or at least make that a separate document that we can bring out as being a topic in itself that we can bring to the ESRC for discussion and for decision, in terms of looking at trying to finalize research priorities, and come up with a process, possibly the same way as we did it before with that RFP, or some other means in terms of actually funding those, and so that we can actually bring the research topic to the ESRC table as a discussion and a decision item. Because otherwise it seems like it's connected so much to the guidance document that when we talk about the guidance document, that's just going to be one little piece we'll talk about as a whole, as opposed to being able to focus a real discussion item, again, like we did today, on research needs and how to go from here to there.
Jim, I'm just noticing there's something in the chat that they've put in from the YouTube chat. Did we address that yet? I don't think so, right? So it says, do we know what bats must have to survive and reproduce successfully? And do we know much about what ecological factors, if taken away, will negatively affect them? I'm not sure if Karina or Frank or Chris want to speak to that, or Marcos.
Yeah, but it also comes back to something that you're constantly asking, Melissa, too.
Maybe it's one of my students.
Again, I don't think we're going to have time to really address that in a full sense there. So maybe just a couple of real quick thoughts on that, Karina or Chris or Frank. But I think we're going to try and conclude this discussion, and I really would like to get the some thoughts from Dave in terms of the question I asked. Chris, Karina, Frank got his hand up still, or Marcos. Marcos, you just came in to jump in. You got the floor.
Yeah, thanks. I think there's been a lot of discussion in the past about limiting factors and what do they need. I just want to point out that in many of these proposals for follow-up research, there should be some attempt at linking limiting factors to measures of, say, occupancy or distribution, and that's often lacking. We get these great measures of like how things are, bat numbers are fluctuating or occupancy is fluctuating over time or space, but there's not really tight relationships to the resource, and sometimes there's associations to habitat attributes, but not really to what they might need in terms of shelter or food. And so I know this has been brought up in the past, but I think that tying in studies that incorporate prey available prey is really important in, especially with occupancy type studies, because they could be tightly correlated.
Yeah, good. And a lot more discussion was taken on that topic in the workshop, and so anybody interested, you can go back to the recordings of that meeting and get more information on it too. But it certainly is a really important piece. So Dave, thoughts on trying to pull this out as being the research as being a particular item that we can focus on independent of the guidance document?
Yeah, I think that'd be great. And I think too, we don't necessarily need to vote on this. We could just have an ongoing discussion item. I think we're getting really good input here, but to have just sort of a standing list of things that we think would be good, and we could discuss them from time to time and see if we still think that's a good idea. Yeah. And then I noticed Frank has his hands up, and I think Chris wanted to say something as well.
Okay. Well, I just want to say I think there is a decision part too, which is what we did back in 2015 when we decided, as an ESRC to put out that RFP. And so it actually was a decision point in terms of a process of how we would actually try and get some of that research done through that RFP. So, I think there are some decision items we can.
If you did that, but currently, I don't think Fish and Wildlife Service is able to utilize research as a mitigation. So I don't think we can do that same thing again, but maybe some kind of blending like Chris was talking about.
Yeah, that's what I was looking for. Not necessarily replicating that same process, but actually to come up with some sort of a more tangible means of stepping forward on research.
Yeah, so, absolutely.
So let's see.
Can I add one more thought on that, Jim, real quick?
Please.
I actually think that there's two different sets of research questions that we're kind of looking at. One is research that is necessary for our understanding of the recovery of the species. That's sort of piece number one. And that's the piece that we're really good at as scientists and as, people across the state that work in this world. The research for the recovery of the species is one big pocket. The other big pocket is the research that we really want to see in order to be able to help with decision making. Now, in many cases, those two overlap, and there may be projects that fall under both of those categories, but both of them are priorities. And I think that it's helpful for me, at least, to think about them in the two different bins.
Good point. Thank you. Okay, let's see. Frank, you've got your hand up still. Is it just a residual hand, or do you have more thoughts you want to jump in on?
Yeah, it might have been left over. I think Chris went ahead.
Thank you. I'll be very quick. I just wanted to say that
we didn't hear what you were going to say. You started to say something and then you cut out.
Am I? Yeah. I just wanted to say that I have, as a person with a research background who's retired and no longer is seeking research funds, I am still very interested in contributing to these discussions. And I did send a 2-page document of what I think are low-hanging or important research topics to COA and to Jim a couple days ago. And I hope that'll be distributed to everybody if it hasn't already. And again, thank you for continuing these discussions, and that's all.
Okay, well, thanks a lot. Yeah, I think we're going to aim to wrap up now. Again, it's getting hunger time, but I would like to again with to see whether you agree to keep this discussion going, and I would like to see it as an addition to our next ESRC meeting, to continue this discussion, and at that point is actually provide materials for the discussion, actually put in into the materials packet, that appendix to the RFP list of research recommendations from our 2016 RFP. As well as some new ideas that came out in discussions within the task force, and documents such as what Frank has got, and from anybody else who's got ideas, is to bring that in, so that we can have that beforehand, and then have a discussion in terms of trying to actually look at what our priority items, and decide really how we can move beyond that. I'm afraid I feel that we haven't really been able to provide an answer to Joel in terms of whether he should continue to pull his sensors out of the field right now or keep them in a little bit longer. Not that I expected we'd have a decision really today, but I'm not sure how close we are to be able to give him some advice on that. But I think this has been a fruitful discussion. I hope you folks have felt it has been useful too. And I really hope that we can continue it on to the point of where we get beyond just talking about it, but actually get some new research going, either through mitigation funds or whatever other sources. But if we can identify those key questions that need to be addressed and some studies that at least frameworks of studies, then I think we can proceed with trying to find funds for them.
Jim, I assume Joel needs an answer today or soon. And I actually heard Michelle say earlier she saw a lot of value in, they're deployed, they're out, we have the equipment. There's a lot of value that she sees in continuing to collect those data. And I think we simply layered on top of that if that's all we ever do, it's probably not good enough. But that she mentioned, I just want to remind us that she did mention seeing a lot of value in it and maybe continuing on. Sorry, Michelle, I don't want to put word in your mouth. So correct me as needed.
No, I do see value in it. I think the challenge is funding, right? There is no readily available funding that I see currently within our span of control that can be put towards continuing that. And I certainly don't have an expectation that West continue that research without a dedicated funding source.
Yeah. Any last thoughts? We have a couple minutes left. I
have something else before we adjourn, but it's a different topic.
Okay. On this topic, last chance. And then again, I would like to request that we put it on our agenda for our next meeting too, if that's okay.
Chris has something.
Go, Chris.
Yeah, I just wanted to thank you guys for letting me participate. And as part of Tetra Tech, we look forward to working towards this and continuing with it. What is the capacity to have these meetings, like continued meetings? If I was to be in charge, I would set up a monthly meeting. I would have a monthly meeting until we find a result. So I don't know what the capacity is for the ESRC committee, but what is the capacity to do this? What does it look like?
Right now, we have two venues, through the ESRC. One is through the ESRC meetings themselves, and the other one is through the BAT task force. And the ESRC meetings are scheduled fairly regularly. We come up with additional ones as needed. But the task force is again, we have a mission. The mission is to look at the guidance document and provide recommendations that will come back to the ESRC. And so that's an ongoing thing. And so we can schedule meetings on the task force as needed. When we were doing the RFP back in 2016, I mean, we were meeting every week, if not, more frequently than that, to get that pulled together. So, we do have that option. We just need to get back, we'll at our next BAT task force meeting, we'll try and come up with a way of addressing those issues. But it certainly is within the ask that the ESRC has given to the task that's been given to the task force.
Yeah, we can work with our staff on trying to put something together, Chris. We'll contact you too and see if we can't put together an ad hoc group that can work on it.
Yep.
Yeah. Thank you again for your time.
Awesome.
Kavika.
Yeah, so thank you. And just to be quick, I'm hoping that we can add something else for the agenda for next meeting. I did mention Javi earlier. I'm still not sure what's going on with that, so it'd be nice to have an update. My understanding is they're claiming to be the only wind project in the state that doesn't have any take, therefore they don't need a HCP. Maybe I'm wrong, but it'd be good to get some kind of update so we can figure out what's going on there. I don't think it's appropriate that any wind projects be operating without an HCP.
Yeah, and the other one that's dropped off is the Lalamilo one, the one up above, by Waikoloa.
Yeah,
and,
well, whatever there are that doesn't have HCPs, it'd be nice to check in on that, get an update.
Yep, exactly.
Yeah, so Javi is, oh, sorry, go ahead, Lisa.
I brought it up with staff as well, Kavika, when that came up, and I saw that they were going in for a new power purchase agreement, and it just seemed that, again, this layer of having the PUC approving projects without any consultation with like other parties seems very concerning to me. So I had raised it with staff as, is there any way for us, you know, what are the comments from DOFA to PUC as this comes forward?
Just for awareness, we had sent previous letters to the PUC and HECO with our concerns about the approval process without consulting with the agencies first. We sent those letters, I think, in 2018. We are resending them now.
So no reply? Does that mean no reply?
We have not, we did not receive a reply in 2018. But I think we did have conversations with them. We are going to do it again because there has been turnover.
And no reply from PUC or no reply from the wind farm itself?
The wind farm is a different story. We have had numerous conversations with them.
Well, I know we're all hungry and this wasn't on the agenda for this time around, but it'd be awesome if we could somehow make it on the agenda for next time so we can wrap our brains around this and figure out a good pathway forward. But I don't think the one we're currently on is appropriate.
Okay, so with that, I just want to thank Joel, Marcus, Frank, and the other folks that were able to join us, Chris, Karina, just to thank you guys for your participation today on that research, and we'll keep pushing that forward. And other than that, that's all we got for our meeting today. If there are other things that you want to see on the agenda, Kavika or anybody else, just go ahead and contact staff and we'll work it into the agendas going forward. And we'll meet as often as we need to deal with the business at hand. So is there any other comments or questions or anything anybody just wants to say at the end here?
Yeah, thanks to everybody for your jumping in on this discussion, and hope we can come up with something more concrete in the future. Good discussion.
Yeah, good. Thank you. Okay, if there's nothing else, then move to adjourn here.
I'll second that one.
Okay. Okay, we're adjourned. Aloha.
Okay. Thanks, everyone. Aloha.
Yeah, thank you. Thanks, Gordon.
Everybody.